If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People, share your true creepy unexplainable encounters, paranormal, ghosts, strange and otherworldly events and supernatural experiences that still defy logic.
Once, when I was about 9, I was in the woods that were behind the apartments we lived in at the time. I was walking around sneakily trying to find squirrels or something to pretend to shoot with my pellet gun. It was a late spring morning, and I was all by myself in the woods, though not far from the row of apartments at the entrance of the woods. The silence was suddenly broken by the foreign sound of a car engine driving over grass. I look at the grassy strip that was between the woods and the back doors of the apartments to see a white van racing along the wood line. The van came to a stop about 30 yards past where I was in the woods, and the doors flew open as 4 men raced into the woods, saying, "There he is, get him, and he's over here." I had just come from the direction where they stopped, and something in my brain told me to run home. So I did. I never figured out what that was all about, but I think about it regularly. On a mountaintop in East TN, circa 2006, my friend and I were camping alone. We were both teenagers. The sky was clear, and I believe it was a new moon. We could easily see satellites and whatnot. Then we noticed dots moving in patterns, like drawing a square or triangle repeatedly, and we naturally joked about aliens. Shortly after, it started raining hard, and we weren't really set up for that, so we decided to put the fire out and walk back down the steep muddy road to his grandparents' rental cabin, which we had free rein of. As we walked along the ridge of the mountain, to my right were 2 humanoid beings, maybe grayish-greenish skin, about 5 feet 8 inches. They didn't look like greys. They stood there watching us as we passed by, and I looked right at them, but I didn't think anything of it and didn't mention it. It felt like I knew they were going to be there, but it also felt like there was something between us, like how you can be on the other side of a fence from a tiger and feel at ease. I knew they couldn't do anything to me, like it was forbidden by some higher force. As we walked down the road, my friend stopped and asked where we were and how he got there. He said that he had just woken up, but we had been talking as we walked beforehand. We were both kind of amused and didn't think much of it, and I never thought to tell him what I saw. Went to a place called X-Bar Ranch, Texas. Great place to see the Milky Way, Sonoma Caverns. We initially stepped outside to observe the stars. As soon as I stepped onto the patio, a profound silence enveloped the surroundings, and it felt as though I had suddenly entered a bubble. I looked to my right, and we both saw a black, smoky, almost pixel-like black figure. It moved back and behind a tree. I got a flashlight, and, yep. We did not imagine it. It stood there staring at us. It was about 7 feet tall, with no features, no eyes, and nothing else. I went to step closer, and it disintegrated right in front of us. As soon as it was gone, bugs came back, crickets did, and the heavy feeling of being in a bubble went away immediately. To this day we have no clue what it was and rarely talk of it in fear people will think we are crazy. This one could be considered a bit basic, but I still think about it from time to time. I was approximately 12 to 14 years old, which was around 20 years ago, lying in bed and watching television. I was at the end of the hall on the left, and the bathroom was at the very end, so anytime someone went to the bathroom, they would go by my room. So I was lying there watching TV. I think it was a Yankee game. I heard the floor creaking, so I figured my mom was coming to shut my door since it was getting pretty late and she was going to bed. The TV was fairly bright, and I had a small lamp next to my bed on, so I could see the hallway fairly well and assumed it was keeping her up. When the floor creaks got to my door, it wasn't my mom. It was a shadowy figure, but not like just a shadow on the wall. I couldn't see the wall behind the shadowy figure. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't a perfect silhouette either. It had a humanoid shape, but it also appeared very wispy. But anyways, it just kind of walked down the hall into the bathroom, and that was the end of it. It didn't stop in front of my room, it just acted like it was going to use the bathroom. I got up and shut my door immediately. Peeked into the bathroom quickly but didn't see anything. Never told anyone about it either. Still have no idea what happened that night. When I was a kid, maybe around 1998 to 2001, I lived in a small remote town, and our house was at the edge of the town, where it ended and the forest started. After school, I used to spend my late afternoons and evenings playing in the forest alone, as none of my school friends lived nearby and there were no kids in my neighborhood. I usually had this spot in the forest that was a small clearing with a big tree in the middle where I used to play. It was a little deep inside the forest but not so deep that I'd get lost. I always returned home before it got dark. One afternoon I went to my spot and started my usual playing activities. After a short time I heard the tree branches grunt in the big tree in the middle of the clearing. I looked up and saw a man high up in the branches of that tree, staring down at me. Once we locked eyes, he smiled creepily. I lost my shit out of fear and ran back to my house. He did not chase me, but since I never looked back while running, I cannot be sure. I didn't tell anyone about this at home. 2 or 3 days later, I was reading the newspaper that was delivered to my house. My mom would make me read the newspaper daily to enhance my reading skills, as English is not my first language. I saw in a corner of the newspaper a small news article that the dead body of a man had been retrieved from the forest behind our house, the same one where I used to play. It is a big forest covering a lot of land. The article stated that the body was somewhat decomposed, leading them to estimate that he had been dead for several weeks. He reportedly went missing roughly a month ago, the article noted. There was also a small black and white photo of the man, likely when he was alive, attached to the article. It was the same man that I saw in the forest. Same face, same features, but he looked a bit normal in the picture, as opposed to creepy when I had seen him in the forest. I never went to the forest again. Luckily we had to shift to another town shortly because of my mom's job, so I thank my lucky stars. Something strange happened years ago that still cannot make sense to me. So this happened probably like 16 or 17 years ago. I was driving my '94 Ford Taurus, leaving my friend's house with 3 friends in the car. My '94 Taurus was pretty good for this being 0809. There was some kind of hard lump on the steering column that would cause it to lock at certain rotations. My friends live in the worst town in the world for driving. It is all hills and not roads at right angles. Pure madness really. Anyway, I made a left turn onto a downhill road that required me to turn approximately 45 degrees to the right. It was wet, so the car started to slip, and unfortunately, it was right where the knot was. We ended up going straight towards a dirty rocky wooded area. I swear to the universe we were going directly towards a tree. I closed my eyes to brace for impact and whited out. It never hit anything. When we got out, we were on top of a dirt/rock hill with no trees near. Like the tree line was a couple feet further back than it was. I never really talk about this except for literally every time I see the one friend who was in the shotgun seat and saw the same thing. When we were pregnant with our youngest, we took on a paper route for some extra cash. One night we saw a shape-shifting animal, and we both remarked to each other as we pulled into the neighborhood that something felt off, just a general sense that something was not right. It was unusually quiet, just too still. As we were delivering papers, we slowly approached an X crossing. One side of the X was unfinished and just went into the woods next to the neighborhood. There was a huge deer standing on the unfinished road, so we slowed down to look at it. As we came alongside it, it bolted towards the yard next to the road. It instantly went from a brown deer to a dark red, ginger color, like an Irish setter. It shrunk in size to be like a huge dog and was continuing to shrink in size as it reached the yard. It disappeared into the ditch and instantly ran out of the ditch and was now the size of a big but not huge dog and kept getting smaller as we were coasting along behind it, both staring and saying, "WTF?" It ran along the ditch. Now it was dark gray and more lit up by the headlights. It turned black and jumped up a tree, at least 6 feet straight up, climbing like a raccoon as it ran onto a branch that extended over the road, causing us to lose sight of it. Both of us were in get the F out mode, and she floored the gas, and we got out of that little part of the neighborhood. The road we took was located at the back of the neighborhood, meaning there was a row of houses separating us from whatever we had just seen, and we pulled over to ask each other if we had both witnessed the same thing. As we were saying yes, we did see the same thing. We heard this sound I'd never heard before. It was like a wolf trying to howl, but it had a really bad sore throat. It started as a howl but then became a choking bark, which went on very loudly for a couple of minutes before fading away. This incident occurred in Indian Shores, Texas, about 20 years ago. The only other time it felt weird there was after a huge storm had rolled through. Most of my dreams are lucid dreams. I don't know why, but I always know when I am dreaming and can, for the most part, do what I want to. I act like myself and can make decisions but can't control the scenario/setting. I always remember my dreams very well. When I was much younger, I slept in my room in the basement, which had a small window and a large mirror standing in the corner. I started a lucid dream. I sat up from the bed in my dream and saw my body asleep in bed. I walked outside into the backyard and looked through my small window into my room. I saw my body in bed just like before, but there was a shadow figure standing in my room watching me. I waited and watched. The shadow figure pulled my blankets off of me and started slowly dragging me out of bed and toward the large mirror in the corner of my room. I saw the shadow figure start to step into the mirror like it was a portal, trying to drag my limp body through it as well. I panicked and ran inside and back into my room to stop him. When I got in the room, the shadow figure dropped my body and vanished into the mirror, and then I woke up. I was not in my bed. I woke up on the floor in front of my mirror in the exact position the shadow figure left me in. I've always been afraid to have another experience like that. Weird ritual by the river. When I was younger, I used to hang out at this spot by the river. There was a sort of path you could take from the road down to a sandy beach area where people hung out. We would usually listen to music and drink or smoke weed while we watched people float by on their little tubes and whatnot. One night, my closest friend and I were walking down to go smoke here because it was on the way and we wanted to stop walking for a bit. Off to the side of the main area that people hung out in was a sandy spot under an overpass where people often had small fires as the night went on. It wasn't uncommon for my friend and I to walk up to people doing this and end up hanging out for a while. On this night we saw that there was a fire. We saw shadows moving like people were dancing all kinds of crazy, so of course we wanted in. We were coming through the bushes and trees that you pass through to get to the spot, and we stopped dead in our tracks when we saw how everyone was dressed. Black robes. Everyone had on a robe with a hood that obscured their faces. They all looked down at the fire and chanted as they danced around it in a roughly choreographed manner. Looking around for a moment before we dipped out, we saw that they had written symbols all over the wall that acted as a support to the overpass. My buddy kinda said, "Oh shit, what?" And they looked over for a sec, which had us booking it out of there. Nobody tried to say anything or stop us. They sounded like they just kinda kept going. My friend and I went back the next day, and the fire pit was cleared out, the wall was clean, and they left nothing behind. It really creeped us out, 'cause we could see the smudges on the wall where they wiped everything away, and you could see in the sand that tons of people walked in and out of there all night. We never saw anything like it again, and asking around brought us nothing but weird looks. I always thought they were some college kids on some weird occult kick, but it's harder to say as time passes because it was just so odd for the area. I want to share my experience. When I was a child, my parents went to the movies and took my brother for the first time to a film rated for ages 15 and up. It was Traffic. I was left alone at home. They apparently thought I was asleep, but I took the opportunity to watch TV and enjoy some time by myself. After an hour, I heard a noise coming from the living room, followed by light footsteps approaching. Through the doorway, I saw my brother, wearing the same green sweater he'd worn to the movies, running quickly down the hallway. Terror gripped me, and I immediately jumped up and went to the window facing the front door to wait for my family to arrive. While I was doing that, a friend of my older brother was coming home from work and saw me sitting there. He asked me what was wrong, and I told him. Instead of calming me down, he proceeded to share a similar experience. When he was in college, he lived in an apartment building with a basketball court. His roommate told him he was going downstairs to play with some neighbors, and he stayed on the balcony reading. A few minutes later, he heard the apartment door open and saw his roommate come in. From a distance, he asked if they were finished, saying it had been very quick. His roommate ignored him and went into the room. He turned to look at the court and saw him playing there with the others. Just writing these stories gives me goosebumps. And listening the rest does too. Is there an explanation for this phenomenon? I would go visit my mom in the summer during my younger years in Texas. I always felt that something was off about her place. She had a trailer house, and I always refused to go down the hallway and into any of the rooms in the back part. One summer she asks if I want to play a game. She pulls out a Ouija board and tells me what it does. Me, being 7 to 8 years old, thought it was cool. We played and nothing happened. That next summer I came back and I was watching TV. In the corner of my eye, I saw a tiny white mouse run along the wall and go behind the TV. After that I felt the need to look towards the kitchen, which had the scary hallway and back rooms. Not more than 6 feet away stood a dark figure with white eyes just staring at me. I jumped up and ran into my mom's room. That night, I slept in her bed, and while we lay there, we heard what sounded like a chair sliding across the floor. We didn't dare get up to see what it was. When we woke up, one of the dining room chairs was at the end of the hallway facing the back bedroom. Then the next summer I came back. The first night there my mom told me to not look at the end of the bed because there will be a head peeking up with red eyes watching you. I looked and it was there. The last experience I had was at my dad's house in my late teens. The house was built in 1902 and was used as a doctor's office/hospital. The previous owner of the house had also died there. I slept upstairs, which was the eerie feeling part of the house. Anyway, I was sleeping, and I always close my door and then lock it. I woke up out of nowhere, which was unusual for me, and looked towards the door. It was wide open, and I saw a man peeking around the doorway with a wide smile, like it covered his whole damn face. I closed my eyes and prayed super hard. I felt it come closer, like he was in my face. I prayed harder, and all of a sudden, the feeling vanished. I never did open my eyes to see if he was still there. Next door to my childhood home, there used to be a family. The houses were identical, and the windows were parallel to each other. So one could just go to the window and call their name, and they would come along to have a chat. They had a boy who was my age, and we used to play together. My parents, as well as his parents, were both working. My elder sister was already going to school. His grandma moved in with them as she was struggling with an aggressive form of dementia. She used to be affectionate towards us children but not as much towards her son and daughter-in-law, as they were the caregivers and she disapproved of the medication. She had almost regressed to a childlike state. She would argue with them and retreat to her room, slamming the door shut, but eventually she would emerge as if nothing had occurred, as she would forget about it. One day I heard a lot of commotion and banging on their doors. So I just unknowingly went to our window to see what the fuss was about. Then I saw it. The next door kid's grandma had ended herself, and I saw her in that state with her tongue out and eyes bulging. I was too young to know about death, so when my father rushed in, he picked me up and shut the window. I didn't understand a thing back then, as I must have been around 5. After a few months, we moved to a new apartment building, and eventually I started going to school and had completely forgotten about the incident. Life was going along as usual, and a couple of years or so later, one afternoon, I had returned from school and gotten into the elevator. As it was going up, power went out, and I freaked out in the dark, and I was panicking. Suddenly I felt a soothing pat on the back and a lady's voice telling me it's okay in my native language. Suddenly the lights came back on, and I glanced back to see who it was, and from the corner of my vision, I saw the neighborhood grandma for a split second before she vanished. This was the only time I experienced something like this, and I didn't even tell anyone about it for years. I live on a dairy farm in Scotland, and about a year ago my dad's boss passed away. We moved to a different part of Scotland about 8 months ago, but the 4 months we were at the farm after his death were the scariest months of my life. So about 1 month after his death, my dad starts finding random objects out of place, and none of us thought anything of it. And a week later he sees a shadow walking past the dairy door. A couple of days later, the other worker on the farm, Roger, sees a shadow walk through the shed, so the incident happens 2 or 3 times before he tells my dad, and my dad tells him about his experiences, so my dad comes home that night and tells us all while we are having dinner. Nothing happens for a week until I see it walking through a shed at about 5:30 a.m. I help my dad on my weekends off school, then it's not seen for about a month or so. Then my dad comes home saying he's been tapped on the back, and for a week he refuses to work there by himself, and one morning I was walking down the parlor, and I was tapped on my left shoulder. I'm shaking just saying this. Then, about 30 minutes later, I was pushed into my dad, then we moved, and I've never experienced anything like it, and hopefully never will experience anything like it, again. I was driving an isolated back road in southern Maryland with a friend late one night. The road was not far from where we both lived at the time and was rumored to be home to strange phenomena. So we, hoping to catch a glimpse of some of the fabled ghosts that roamed that old piece of road, went to look. It was a summer night, cool breeze, windows down, and something on the radio. I don't recall what. What I do recall I'll explain. We approached a 4-way stop with a single flashing red traffic light suspended above the intersection. To our right was an old service station that looked like it had closed in the 50s and been perfectly preserved since then. There was an old faded marquee-style gas sign on a post at the corner, the kind that at one point was lit by standard screw-in bulbs. I think I hear music playing through the old horn speakers above the pumps. Turn the radio off for a second, I say to my friend. She turns the radio off, and we both distinctly hear Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. We sit for a moment, the intermittent flashing of the traffic light illuminating the scene in a soft, pulsating red glow. There was nothing eerie about it, and though it was strange, we just sat and listened for a minute or two before driving on. The following day, I suggested, let us return to that old gas station and capture some photographs in the daylight. We agree this is a great idea, grab some coffee and head back out to the spot. We drove for about 15 minutes, and as we came around a bend, there was the intersection, there was the traffic light, there was the gas sign, but there was no service station. It's gone. It is completely absent. Weeds are now growing out of the concrete where it once stood. It hadn't been there in years. But, we both saw it just the night before. Neither of us could explain it, and our day took on a strange mood from that moment forward, as did several days to follow. I still can't explain what happened or what we saw. Seeing shadow figures at night as a child. I'm sharing this for the first time, and I still don't know how to explain it. When I was around 6 years old and staying with my grandmother, I used to see shadow-like figures walking around the room at night while I was in bed. They never interacted with me or felt threatening. I was scared, but it also felt strangely familiar, so I would pull my blanket up and quietly watch them. I could see them opening doors and moving around, and the details felt very real, the shadows of trees outside, the sense of cold air coming in, everything. I want to clarify that I wasn't half asleep or drifting in and out of sleep during this. I was fully awake and aware while watching it happen. After some time, the shadow figures stopped, and the experience changed into something else. I began seeing what looked like a large board covered with ancient inscriptions, slowly rotating. With each rotation it would zoom closer and closer. If I blinked, it would reset and start again from a distance. Unlike the shadow figures, this didn't stop even when I closed my eyes, which made it much more unsettling. I've never been sure whether this was psychological, neurological, or something else entirely, but it was vivid, recurring, and stayed with me for a long time. My friends and I were standing on top of an abandoned hospital's roof on a nice summer night. One of my friends gets a voicemail and is listening to it. Another friend and I walk towards the edge and look at the nearby abandoned tower building, maybe a mile away. I see what looks like a person in white pajamas jump off the tower. Witnessing this didn't evoke any emotion as it almost didn't seem real. My friend confirmed they saw the same thing, but they too were not fazed by it. There was something about it that made it feel like it didn't actually happen when we witnessed it. Like watching a ghost's last human moments when the hospital was still operational. A minute after that, my friend, listening to their recent voicemail, looks freaked out. They said, "We need to get out of here now." We run down the cement steps in the building, only partially lit by our flashlights. We make it back to the car, and my friend plays the voicemail. It's a conversation between two people, no one we know. Like a recording that made its way into a voicemail. One person is trying to help the other person get up, while the second person is struggling to rise on their own. This goes on for some time, but the general consensus is that they were scared and maybe in danger. I immediately thought of the tunnels that connect the hospital buildings and how one could easily drop 20 feet or have trouble getting up in that permanent darkness if something happened to one's flashlight. We left and didn't really speak of it again. My grandpa had a cabin deep in the woods of the Ozarks in Missouri. His backyard was Mark Twain National Forest. My brother and I spent our summers running all over those woods, fishing, building fires, or whatever. The woods were so thick that you pretty much had to follow trails. The trail from my grandpa's house led to a fork. Where the trail split off, there was an old chest filled with dirt. Unrelated but still interesting. It was there every time. One day we went right and found a little town. It was 6 of the tiniest houses you had ever seen. Neatly stacked in rows of 3 next to each other. Tiny rectangle-shaped playhouses. They had the tiniest little room and a small piece of wood attached to the corner for sitting. They were all empty. It gave us the creepiest feeling, so we left. As soon as we exited the woods to my grandpa's yard, our bodies were infested with ticks. Hundreds crawling all over us. We showered and somehow only had a few to pluck out. Another time, we went left and found a full-size abandoned house. Nothing was inside. We were creeped out and only went inside for a minute before running home. We told our dad about both of these things, so he took us back into the woods to show him. Neither the full-size house nor the tiny village was there anymore. It was like we imagined it. We explored those woods many times after this and never saw the houses again. I get chills every time I think of this story and don't like to tell it. I wonder what would have happened to us if we stuck around longer than we did. The forest is no joke, people. A few things come to mind outside of the 2 near-death experiences I've had. One time when I was maybe 11 to 12, my grandpa, my cousin, and I were walking in the woods behind our house. It was early spring. The leaves had just started coming back on the trees. I walked between a cluster of 3 small oak trees, and the landscape changed dramatically. It was cold, there was snow on the ground and on the trees. Something large was stalking me. I caught a glimpse of it, and the best way I can describe it is as a creature that resembled both a yeti and a wendigo. I heard a humming near the 3 oak trees, so I ran back to them, and the land changed back. My grandpa and cousin asked me what was wrong, so I told them. I was shivering and my hair was wet. Grandpa said it was best if we went back to the house. We never mentioned it again. Another time I was outside just before dusk. I was playing basketball near the back of the property. I heard my cousin call my name from the woods. A cold chill ran down my spine because I knew she was inside. She had not been feeling well, so she stayed inside and watched TV with our grandparents. I booked it at the house. I told them what happened, and they said I did the right thing. My cousin said she had heard me calling from the woods the day before when she took the trash out. We did have neighbor kids that lived up the hill from us, but they sounded different, and they were afraid of the woods, so they would not go in there, especially towards nighttime. Also, whoever called out to me used a nickname that only my cousin and a couple of other family members called me. The neighbors did not know it. We had some really nice neighbors next door who had a really big fluffy dog. One day, out of the blue, she became really aggressive towards us. They kept her in their yard, and she'd be friendly towards us as long as her owners were around. Time went on and she would get out occasionally. One night I had trouble sleeping, and for some reason I went to our back door to look outside. I saw the dog walking on its two back legs the entire length of our back fence. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and my arms. I inhaled sharply and froze at the door. I guess she felt it because she looked towards the house, dropped to all fours, and bolted back towards their property. She was very friendly to me from then on, whether the owners were around or not. I was working at the computer desk at home waiting for my kids to get out of school. We lived in a very old, large house that had glass pocket doors separating the dining room and kitchen from the living room, and it also featured a set of service stairs similar to those in the Cosby house, providing 2 ways to get up and down. Obviously. Anyway, I realized it was time to leave to get my kids, so I ran upstairs to grab my shoes or something, I don't know what, and then rushed back down the other set of stairs, through the kitchen, and out the mudroom door. I see the telephone receiver lying on the floor. The house came with an old-style telephone with the cord, and it worked as our landline. That was weird because you have to lift it up out of its cradle. It can't just fall or be knocked off easily, but I'm in a hurry, so I hang up the phone and rush out the door. I get to the school, and my daughter is annoyed. She said, "Oh my God, why didn't you freaking talk to me when I called you? I could hear you breathing WTF." My blood ran cold because I realized I'd been watched for who knows how long. My daughter calling while I was upstairs for those 45 seconds saved me. They answered the phone to silence it and then must have quickly left the area. I'm sure it startled them if they were standing in that spot watching or waiting for me. So ducking creepy. That whole house was creepy, TBH, but it was beautiful. The basement was used as a TB quarantine over 100 years ago. So I had some weird shit happen down there too. I was driving back home from my friend's house 40 minutes away from mine. I was about 15 minutes from home. In the area where I was driving, I know that there is internet access because I travel this route every few days. There were absolutely no streetlights, and it was almost pitch black outside. I think there was a house or two, but I could barely tell since there were no lights on. As I'm on this route home, I have been on the phone with my mom for about 25 minutes. I'm driving and I see a big red puddle in the road. There was a lot, and honestly my first thought is that it was blood. I tried to slow down so that I could kind of tell in the dark since it was around 10:30. I didn't slow down enough in order to tell if there was an animal, and there was a concerning amount of it if it was blood. So, I thought I'd just turn around just to make sure since no one was coming down this road anyway. You rarely see anyone in the daylight. I pull into a driveway to turn around a couple of feet from the spot on the road. I pull into the driveway and turn around, but as soon as I do, my call with my mom fails. Call failed. I was just kind of confused when this happened. I start going toward the spot slowly as I try calling my mom back. Call failed. I try again. Call failed. The third time it said call failed, my car also stopped. I was confused. I looked at my dash. The battery light was on, the turn signals were on, the oil light was on, and the engine light was on. Prior to this, none of them were on. My car wouldn't start, so I put it in park. I looked out the windshield, the lights were on, and I saw the red spot. To be honest, I was freaked out since it didn't look like oil or anything. It looked like blood. I tried to call my mom again. Call failed. I called my dad. Call failed. I end up calling my friend whose house I was leaving. She answers before the first ring. My calls to my mom aren't going through. Could you please call her and tell her to look at my location? I'm having car troubles. She immediately hung up and called my mom for me. I'm just sitting there waiting for something to happen. My car still wouldn't start. There's no animal to be the source of this red. It was odd to me that my car stopped working right in front of this red splash. Why did my phone also stop working? I had so many questions and still do. Why is my friend's call the only one coming through? I answered my mom's call, and the car turned on by itself. Her call finally comes through, and my car starts up. All the lights on the dash turn off. I tell her, never mind, my car's working. We stay on the phone as I pull up and turn around to start heading home again. She tells me she's looking at my location as I drive. Life 360 is pretty accurate when you're on your phone and it says it's updated just now. But she said my location didn't update from that spot till I got home. I was walking with some friends early one evening into a bar in Northport, Long Island. If anyone knows Long Island, it has a spooky vibe the further east you go. I had a lot of strange experiences there. This was just one. Anyway, the bar was quiet because it was early in the evening. We walked in, single file, because the bar was to the left and tables to the right, leaving only an aisle until you got further into the place. I was the last in line. Suddenly, I heard my name called, loud and clear. Vinny. I spun around because the voice sounded like it came from behind me. There was nobody there. The voice continued. Don't you remember me? We met on another wavelength. I was in a state of WTFness at that point. The voice was absolutely not internal. I heard it from outside myself. I looked around the bar. A few couples were quietly talking at their tables, my friends were ahead of me, and the bartender was quietly cleaning a glass. It was right out of the Twilight Zone. Later on in time, I asked my friends if they had called my name. They didn't. If it had been a practical joke, they would have eventually let me in on it. To this day, I have no idea what this experience was, and I always wished I knew what this was that I experienced. My best friend and I saw something unexplainable. I don't have a lot of memories from my past. I've undergone a lot of trauma in my childhood that I've blocked out. Yet, this one memory is something so vivid and clear I can detail what we saw that night. It all happened in my backyard. My parents had a big bonfire for the neighborhood back then almost once a week. But they soon got a tiny fire pit closer to the house for just our personal family time. My best friend was always invited since she was always around. I was around 7th going into 8th grade that summer. And we had just got the smaller pit. My mom, dad, sister, nephew, and best friend were roasting marshmallows and just enjoying the night. Talking and laughing and just having fun. All of a sudden a very white figure appeared in the corner of my eye. On instinct my head turned to look at whatever was so out of place in the dark night. My heart raced like it never had before, and my eyes went really wide. Breathing picked up as what I saw was a white saber-toothed tiger. It had the black stripes accompanying its white fur. It saw me, and I saw it. But when I blinked, it calmly walked behind my neighbor's dog fence and disappeared. I went to turn away, as I'm used to seeing these things. But usually alone. I was afraid my whole life until that point. I was crazy. That I was seeing things. But when my head turned so I could go back to my family, my eyes met my best friend's. Her eyes were way more frightened than mine. And she whispered to me, "Did you see that?" To which I was honestly stunned and replied yes. She was terrified, more so than I, and that's when my mom asked what we were talking about. So before I could answer, she responded with exactly my own description. I knew I wasn't just seeing things, as she had only asked if I saw what she saw. My mom told us we were seeing things. No one else saw the white mass we did. They just saw darkness. We still talk about whatever it was. And she is still terrified to talk about it. Weird and unexplained occurrence. My wife and I purchased a house at the end of May this year, and since then, we have experienced numerous strange occurrences and a series of unfortunate events. We have heard from neighbors that an older couple used to live here. My wife often feels as if someone is walking in the bedroom and watching her sleep while my son and I are also asleep. Additionally, there are sounds of scratching or vibrations coming from the exterior walls of the bedroom. In the kitchen recently we have experienced a strong smell like rotten eggs. We have also had the freezer door of our fridge open and have had stuff fall out a few minutes apart instead of all at once. In the basement, we feel an eerie sensation when we go down there. Today while I was bathing my son, my wife was downstairs, and she could hear the sound of close together and rapid footsteps on the phone number pad that is located at the bottom of the stairs. We have heard our son's toys going off in the basement, playing the same beginning part of the song and repeating it. Throughout the house, we have doors that will close on their own without anyone being near them. Also, there are unexplained footsteps all through the house, but it's mainly towards the bedroom and basement. There are unexplained hot and cold areas around the house, and articles of clothing are missing. We had some bad luck from situations like losing coworkers, pets, vehicles, and family since purchasing the house. During the summer of 1998, I was driving in Avenel, New Jersey, with my best friend, heading to a party we got invited to. I don't remember the exact street we were on, but it was pretty desolate and near a wooded area closer to Menlo Park Mall in Edison, New Jersey, that was poorly lit. We were at a red light, and then when the light turned green, we went straight, which ran parallel to the wooded area, and all of a sudden, a dark, shadowy figure came running out into the middle of the street. My best friend screamed for me to stop, as it looked like we were going to hit the person. Honestly, it looked like a shadowy figure wearing some type of cloak or long coat, and we plowed straight into it, Except we didn't hit anything solid. The car just got enveloped in total darkness for a few seconds, and then we were out of it. Like we drove through a shadow, but even the lights went out. When we were in it, the windows were open, and the air was so cold we could see our breath. We swore to never speak about it in front of anyone because we feared they would think we were crazy or hallucinating on LSD or shrooms. Occasionally, we still bring it up in conversation just to see if either of us has any idea or explanation as to what we saw that night. It was both cool and terrifying. In the summer of 2006, I was 16 years old. We were on vacation in our hometown. Most people went to the coast at that time of year, and the town was practically empty. My afternoon routine during that period consisted of going to a friend's house and spending the whole afternoon playing video games. Then, in the evening, we'd go to a plaza where we'd continue talking until very late, and then we'd say goodbye and each go back home. I remember that day we stayed out longer than usual, until 3 or 4 in the morning. My friend smoked, but we didn't take drugs or drink alcohol. After our conversation, we exchanged our usual farewells, and I began my walk back home. But home wasn't like other days, not at all. At a narrow street intersection, I looked to the right to cross, and about 2 meters away, I saw a person dressed in a red robe with a hood walking toward me. I noticed it was limping with each step. The small area was very well lit, there was a spotlight directly overhead. Seeing this gave me a strange feeling. The clothing seemed to be from another era or like someone in costume. But when I looked at their face, I was surprised to see nothing. Where there should have been a head, there was only darkness. Realizing this, I panicked, and my heart started racing. I began walking a little faster, and as I crossed the street, I kept looking back to see if whatever it was crossing too. I saw nothing, but the experience wasn't over. When I was halfway down the street, something in my head started calling my name. It was speaking to me telepathically, directly into my mind, saying, "Come here, Danny." Curiously, Danny is what my friends and acquaintances call me. My full name is Daniel. Upon hearing those words, I was filled with terror, and I sped up even more. Every 2 or 3 seconds, I heard it calling me again. It was a whispering voice, and I couldn't discern gender. As I got closer to home, it grew louder, intensifying so much, and this is hard to explain, that I heard the voice in my head, but somehow it was showing me a path, a direction to follow, like when something falls into water and you feel a ripple. I knew exactly where the voice was coming from or where it wanted me to go. The message was the same, but as it was spoken, it marked several points. My street was to the right, the entity, or whatever it was, wanted me to go straight ahead. To this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had followed it, but with the fear I felt, I turned right, and halfway down the street, I heard it for the last time. I had a night of reflection, and when I woke up, something screamed at me while I was in bed, almost at midday. I heard a scream that terrified me, about 30 centimeters away from me, a normal scream, no longer in my head. This was the last part of this paranormal experience/encounter. My friends still don't believe it, and my coworkers find it hard to believe as well. Even now, at 35, I still wonder what I saw/felt that day and what would have happened if I had continued down the path it was leading me down. Since that day, I believe in paranormal stuff. A couple of years ago, my girlfriend at the time and I were living at my mom's house. One day neither of us was working, so we were going to run out and do some shopping. I forgot something in my room, so I ran back inside real quick. She waited in the truck. The hallway outside my bedroom looked down through the kitchen and into the den. If you walk through the doorway between the den and the kitchen, immediately to your left, there were stairs going down to the basement. Well, after I grabbed what I needed, I walked out of my bedroom and started down the hall, and as I looked down the hall, I saw what I can only describe as the back of myself rounding the corner to go down the basement stairs. It was like seeing an echo of something I'd probably done hundreds of times while living there. I swear I was looking at myself from behind, rounding the corner and disappearing. No one else was home. It was the middle of the day. I went and got my girlfriend, explained what I saw, and she was freaked out. We went and investigated and, of course, found nothing. To this day I can't explain it. So I have an interesting story that happened many years ago. Back in the late 1990s, we lived near Portland, Oregon, in what was known as an urban growth zone, meaning homes and neighborhoods were left undeveloped, where many of our neighbors, including ourselves, had a few farmy acres and lived in older homes. This detail is important because the land we lived on was part of the old Oregon Trail. At the time, my oldest son was about 3 years old and very articulate for a little guy, so it wasn't too surprising when, after putting him down for a nap in his room, I could hear him talking to himself. I peeked in and saw him sitting in his bed and asked him who he was talking to, To which he replied, "The old lady. The one sitting in the chair." And then pointed to the rocking chair I kept in his room for reading books together. Well, of course, the chair was empty, so I chalked the experience up to an overactive imagination and just a toddler being a toddler. His statement was somewhat strange and oddly specific, but he didn't seem alarmed or upset, so I let it go. A few nights later, while I was sleeping, my husband at the time traveled frequently, so I often found myself alone with just the children at night. I experienced an extraordinarily unsettling sensation. As I was lying in bed, I had the overwhelming sensation of being watched. The air in my room also took on this weird heaviness. I can only describe it as feeling like I was underwater. It felt like a veil had parted, and I opened my eyes only to see a woman standing above me. Her eyes were locked in on mine, and she was dressed head to toe in old pioneer garb with the most quizzical look on her face, an expression I am sure that I shared with her. Before I could scream, I closed my eyes, and when I looked again, she was gone, but I could hear creaking footsteps going down the hallway to my son's bedroom. I jumped out of bed to check on him. He was fine, but it suddenly occurred to me that this was the old lady, the one who had been in his room. This experience was a game changer for me. It made me question many things that go on in this world and made me think perhaps we are not as alone as we think we are. Back in 2012 I had moved to my mom's house after having issues with my dad, so I had to sleep in my little brother's room. It was a small room with a large window, a twin bed, and a ceiling fan that had a string hanging to turn it on/off as well as the light. My little brother had the habit of trying to scare me by hiding and then popping out and would giggle. I'd play with him and do the same. One day, I was on his bed just scrolling on my phone when I felt the bed move slightly. I knew he did this, so I'm thinking, this little kid thinks he can scare me, I'm going to scare him back. And so I crawled on the bed to sneak up on him at the foot of the bed and no one was there. I checked under the bed, and it was empty. I was dumbfounded. I opened the door and saw my brother was fast asleep on the couch. That was the first incident there. A few weeks later I was feeling a bit tired, so I decided to go take a nap in my brother's room. I had my eyes closed and was barely feeling like I was going to drift to sleep when I noticed brightness, like when someone turns on the lights when your room is dark. Well, our mom had the habit of checking in on us by turning the lights on, asking what we were doing, then turning the lights off and closing the door. She would use the light switch, which was next to the door. Not the strings on the fan. Just needed to clarify. Anyways, I assumed it was her and didn't open my eyes. I didn't hear her ask the usual questions, so I just said, "Turn off the light." No response. The light is still on. I repeat myself, but a bit louder this time. Nothing. So I opened my eyes. The door was still shut like I had it. I didn't hear the door open or close. I was confused and staring at the ceiling when the light flickered for a couple of seconds before turning back on. I remembered a friend telling me to cuss at the entity, so I just said, "Turn the lights off, idiot, and leave me alone." The light did not turn off. But nothing like that ever happened again in that house. I grew up in a rural part of North Tennessee surrounded by woods, hills, and streams. It was always very peaceful and quaint. To set the scene, my house was situated at the edge of a large wheat field, separated from it by a small break of brush. One day, as I was playing on my back porch with my cat Jack, I saw a man moving through this brush away from the field towards my house. This was strange, as there wasn't a path nor a road through this field, and the closest house was miles into the field. This man was different, though, as he had no features, just a dark, shadow-shaped man. Being only about 100 feet away, I should have been able to see the color of his clothes at the least, but I couldn't. So I did what any normal kid would do when they see a shadow man lumbering into their backyard. I barked at them like a dog. This seemed to work, as it quickly turned around and dissipated into the brush being only 15 feet deep. I didn't spot another one until I was 15. I was sleeping in my living room, the moonlight glowing through the bay windows facing the street, my cat Jack sleeping soundly on my chest as she loved to do. Suddenly I was awoken by Jack hissing at something to my left towards the windows. As I stirred awake, I looked over to see what had her so alert. That is when I see a large, wide, and vaguely humanoid-shaped figure standing on the other side of the coffee table. And I can feel it looking at me, even though I can see no eyes nor a face. It looked as if it were wearing a robe and cowl of some kind, and it was big. If I had to estimate, it was 7 feet tall. I sat up and spoke to it. "Hello?" I spoke just above a whisper. No response. I could still feel its gaze on me, unmoving and making no sounds, just still and staring at me. "Hello?" I said more sharply this time, expecting some sort of a response or even a movement. I realized at this point this was neither the size nor the shape of my mother or stepfather, who were also in the house, asleep. I waited there a while before hesitantly reaching out a hand towards the figure. As my hand got closer, I said one more time, "Hello?" And just before my hand reached the figure, I became very, very tired. I yawned, rolled over, and went to sleep, calm and comfortable. I awoke the following morning to notice my cat had gone, which was normal for her. That is when I remembered the past night. I investigated the area to find no objects that could have cast a silhouette of that size, or any size at all. The living room was as clear as it has always been. I even asked my family if they happened to be awake last night, to which they said they slept through the night. Jack was also fine and had already gone outside to explore the yard as she normally did. Nothing happened for many years, until I was 27 just 2 years ago. I was sitting at my computer in Knoxville, Tennessee. I moved there temporarily to be with family for a year. Besides, my computer was a window looking down onto the street. Perfectly centered through the window by the street was a light illuminating the road below. My window was open as I was listening to some music and enjoying a comic when I happened to look out the window onto the street to see a small figure, the shape of a young child no older than 10 years old, only they were featureless and completely shadow. They ran towards the street lamp's light, stopped beneath it, and turned to face me directly. I should have been able to see features with the street light casting down upon them, but I couldn't. Just like the last time, I could feel it looking at me. We both stared at one another for what felt like minutes until it turned back and ran up the road in the direction it previously came from. I looked out the window towards where it ran, and it was gone. Unexplained shadow. This was a few years ago. My friend and I were just having a chat. We were walking down an empty road. Both of us, mind you, were really skeptical of the paranormal at that point. But that evening changed all of that in a jiffy. So, I'll start with the layout of the place. You'll understand better then. Empty concrete road. Towards the left of this road are just some bushes and a few trees. On the right is a huge, nearly 8-foot wall. This wall extends the entire length of the road, about 80 to 100 feet. On the other side is a Muslim graveyard, a Hindu cremation ground, and a Christian graveyard. All three in one single plot of land. A few street lights. It's around 6 in the evening. Now, coming to the story. My friend and I came here to just chill out and talk. We knew that the place would either be completely empty or nearly so. We were right. It was just the two of us. So, we started talking. Nothing related to the paranormal. We were walking on the pavement. The wall with the burial grounds was on the opposite side. Suddenly, my friend stops walking abruptly. He goes dead silent. Surprised, I ask him what happened. He puts his finger to his lips, asking me to remain silent. He then points towards the wall and almost gasps. "What is that?" I look in the direction he is pointing. And there I see it. A dark, almost 6-foot tall shadow on the wall opposite us. It looked very obvious. And then, the skeptic inside me takes over. I am like, "Bro, that is our shadow. Why are you so scared? Chill out, man." My friend then proceeds to wave his hand slowly over his head. He looks at me and says, "If it's really our shadow, shouldn't it be moving its hand too? Why isn't it doing that?" I copy my friend. I start waving too. The shadow simply stands there, imprinted like a ghostly image on the wall. My heart sinks to the ground. That shadow indeed belongs to neither of us too. And we're the only ones here. And then, my jaw drops to the ground too. The shadow simply starts walking. We see it move in stunned, terrified silence with our eyes and mouths agape. Too terrified by what we just witnessed, we cut short our walk and rush back home. After graduating high school, my friends and I scoured our haunted Texas book and took a road trip. We picked some haunted locations to visit along with other tourist locations and started driving around the state. Our first night was in a historical house turned haunted B&B. We loved exploring the B&B and snuck downstairs after everyone else was in bed to creep around and take pictures with our digital cameras, dating my story lol. We were in the front room trying to get pictures of orbs when we heard the doorknob rattle. We all froze, so embarrassed to be caught by late returning guests. But the doorknob rattled and turned but didn't open. Guests would have keys, so we started thinking it was someone trying to get in who shouldn't be there. We were well and truly creeped out by then and went back up to our room. We went to bed and didn't think much about it the next morning, until we went out the front door. We'd forgotten that the front door had a very heavy glass door on it that screeched and slammed when opened and closed. You couldn't reach the doorknob without first opening the glass door. We hadn't heard the glass door the night before when the front doorknob was rattling and turning. As we were standing there in the doorway that morning, we all sort of shared a nervous look, Like maybe we had actually encountered something paranormal that night. We went on with our day and didn't talk about it and were relieved to go to the next hotel the following day. When I was in 4th grade, I was utterly terrified of the dark. Our house was haunted. I found out years later that my younger brother experienced events even worse than mine in this house. The most horrible traumatizing night of my life, related to the supernatural/paranormal, was when I witnessed a tall entity staring at me from my doorway. It was like a luminescent being. I mainly could only make out the head but sometimes would see the outline of half a body cradling the doorway. I felt all sorts of strange things that night. I couldn't yell out for my mom the entire night. I felt numb, electricity all around and inside of me. It was absolutely real and very terrifying. Fast forward about 5 hours, when I finally was able to squeak out, "Mom." Then in the few seconds before she opened her bedroom door, which was directly across from my bedroom, this entity literally disappeared. My mom searched the house, nobody was there. The doors are still locked from the inside. That incident was what started me being terrified of the dark. My mom and stepdad made me turn my light off and shut my bedroom door every evening despite my pleas. I begged them to let me keep my light on or my door open, but they always refused. So this happened one night not too long after the entity in my doorway. I had stuck an old 8-track tape, this was late 70s, in between my door and the door jamb so I could at least get a slither of light from the living room, as it's impossible to describe how dang scared I was. Then, all of a sudden, the 8-track tape flew across the floor all the way across the room, slamming loudly on the opposite wall, and my door slammed shut. Let me tell you, I had never moved so fast in my life. I literally jumped out of bed and ran down the hallway to where my family was all comfortably watching TV. There is no way they could have gotten back into their positions in the living room so quickly. I remember this like it was yesterday. It was the start of many paranormal events that followed me into my 30s. A few years after this, I started having nightly episodes of terrifying sleep paralysis. Oftentimes I would fight for my life, feeling suffocated, and would get out of it, and then as soon as I fell asleep again, it happened over and over. So much that my mom took me to a doctor to try and get me some help. I was terrified to go to sleep, it affected every aspect of my life. And anyone who's experienced these SPs knows exactly what I'm talking about. Just absolute horror. Anyway, that's all behind me now. My spiritual awakening began back in 2010, and since then, I feel a peace I never knew was possible. Anyways, thank you for allowing me to share. I always feel blessed to be able to connect with others on this journey. Sending love and light to all. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, I still played with dolls. I remember that day, I had my friends over, and we played in my room. I had a strange feeling that day, like something was off, and I couldn't exactly figure out why. It was an eerie feeling. As they left, we said our goodbyes, and I was alone. I opened my closet door where I keep all my toys and dolls. To paint the picture, I had a makeshift bed that I made for my American Girl doll. She was lying down on it, and next to her was a doll, sitting. It was so bizarre because this particular doll could not sit without the risk of breaking its legs. It was designed to stand only. I thought, maybe one of them put my doll like this before they left. So I picked it up, turned my body slightly, and put that doll in the bin with the rest of my toys. It took maybe 2 to 3 seconds. I turned back, and another doll is sitting in the same place. Exact spot where the previous doll was just. I just remember my heart dropped and I stood there in shock. I backed away from my closet and just stared at it as I did. I was terrified to take my eyes off of it because clearly something happens when I do. Eventually I just shut the closet doors and yelled for my mother. I left my room and told her everything as I was crying. She went to my room and looked at my closet and told me there wasn't anything there out of the ordinary. My memory could be wrong there, or maybe she just didn't care to notice. That same day I said, I'm done with playing with toys, I'm old enough to move on. All of it was thrown out that night. To preface, I don't have siblings, I lived with my mother only, and my friends were all long gone by the time I went to my closet. I was alone in my room. I think about it to this day, it doesn't make sense. How could something like that happen in a span of maybe 1 second or 2? Why was the doll in the exact same spot when it was far from where the previous one was? I hadn't seen it anywhere, especially on the makeshift bed. It was as if it just appeared out of thin air. It still haunts me to this day because it seems so impossible. Nothing paranormal ever happened to me in that apartment since or before then. I just ask myself why. Was something trying to communicate with me? It was just a regular day, and I remember it so vividly. One of my jobs is to manage a building in upstate NY. Part of the building has 3 upper floors that are in such disrepair that it isn't worth renovating and renting the space, so it stays abandoned. I have to go up there every once in a while to check on a roof leak or other maintenance issue. I am the only one with keys to access this space. Every time I go up, I close all doors in case a pigeon or something somehow gets in. I had a previous issue where they got in the HVAC. The doors are always back open the next time I go up, but I have never thought much of it. One day I went up to check on a boiler and noticed a bunch of marbles laid out like someone was playing. Small marbles and also a big smasher. I would have definitely seen these before, as they are a trip hazard. It creeped me out, and I don't like going up there alone these days. I asked the tenant below this space if he'd noticed anything out of the ordinary, and he mentioned sometimes when he's alone he'll hear someone say PSST like someone wants to get your attention but never finds where it's coming from. We have dogmen here, where I live. No one outside this family. No one believes we've seen them over the years. For years they used to stay in the neighbor's cherry orchard. But, since 2024, the neighbors across the road from us have removed all of their apple trees. Their apple orchard. Our property has completely changed as soon as the sun goes down. You can actually feel the difference between night and day out here now. The first time I actually saw one was back in 2024. I had to go outside at about 2 a.m. to retrieve our dog from her leash. We kept her near the orchard and our actual neighbor's yard. But not too close to the orchard. But anyway, I walked up to her to hook a leash onto her collar. And removed her lead. Then, I happened to look up in the direction of the cherry orchard. At the entrance of the cherry orchard. Standing directly in front of a cherry tree in the very first lane. I see a very large, black, 2-legged, dog-like creature standing there, looking right at me. It stood about as tall as the tree. That is what it was standing in front of. I was happy that our dog either saw the creature or felt its presence. She immediately took off, dragging me to the front door of the house. As quickly as possible. Her ears were back and she was whimpering, too. I only saw it for a few seconds. Before this, I was being dragged back to the house by Happy, our dog. I never thought they could ever leave the orchard. I honestly thought that. Until the end of last summer. I had planted some trees. And I liked watering them in the evening with a sprinkler. One night, I went outside to receive the sprinkler after watering the last tree of the night. It was about 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. when I stepped outside to go to the sprinkler and turn the water off. Anyways, I go to step outside. I went to turn around after shutting the front door. I go to turn my head. I see something dark and extremely tall with pointy ears on its head walking past our dog kennel out of the corner of my eye. Our dog kennel is like 12 feet tall. And this thing's ears reached halfway up to the roof of the kennel. So, this thing was like 8 feet tall. And it completely vanished by the time I turned around and looked in the direction I saw it. And it's an open field. And I have a 3 by 3 foot hole near the kennel in the direction it went. I have so I kept forgetting to bury the hole. And we live 12 minutes outside of town. Out in the county. Our neighbors never come on the property without our permission. And neighbors don't have any older kids. Plus, you would see anyone on the property. We also have hop fields that border our property on one side. Neighbors next to the hop fields. You can clearly see into their property. No one has privacy fences around here. Just regular wire fencing around here. One other time. When I was up at the irrigation pump turning off the water for the night, I could physically hear something very large and heavy walking towards me from the neighbors to the right of us before the cherry orchard. I immediately looked in the direction from which the sound was coming. And saw nothing. I even looked with the flashlight I had. Nothing there. Another night. I went to grab a sprinkler at this elm tree that sits the closest to the cherry orchard. As soon as I bent down to shut the water off on the sprinkler. To pick up the sprinkler. I could clearly hear something walking out of the cherry orchard and toward me. I refused to look up in that direction. I immediately grabbed the sprinkler and hose. I turned towards the house and immediately started walking as quickly as possible. The sound of the footsteps stopped as soon as I got in the light in front of the house. Thankfully, I still needed to go to the irrigation pump to turn the water off. Then, go back into the house for the night. Dad, he's always denied there was anything out there. Until recently. He saw one walk up to the house and passed his vehicles in the driveway. My uncle sees them too. It's not just me that sees or hears. I know you're supposed to ignore them. But sometimes it gets hard to ignore them. When they kept showing up on our property. Unexplained noises at my mom's boyfriend's house from 2006 to 2009 when we moved out. When my mom first decided to move into her boyfriend's house back in 2006. My sister and I moved in as well but didn't have a room set up yet, so we had to sleep on the couch for a week or so. Their room was on the same level as the living room. Every single night we would always hear a loud noise coming from the attic upstairs, which was finished. It sounded like someone was running back and forth, stomping their feet. I always tried to tell my mom and her boyfriend, but they didn't want to believe it. They said since it was an older house, it was probably just the house settling. I didn't believe it. I even asked my mom's boyfriend if I could do an EVP in his house to prove there was something there. Lol, he said no way. He said he didn't want to know if his house was really haunted, lol. So after a week of hearing those running noises from upstairs, my mom and her boyfriend came running out of their room asking if one of us had been screaming. I told them no, we were trying to sleep. He tried to shrug it off like it was nothing, but I knew obviously there was something going on. Until my sister and I finally had our room ready to sleep in, which was upstairs in the finished attic. I hated that room, it seriously creeped me out. There was also another room in the finished attic that my brother and sister would sleep in whenever they would come visit. One morning my little brother went downstairs, he was probably about 6 or 7 at the time, and said to my mom's boyfriend, "Doug, it was so funny last night when you were hiding in the closet talking to me." Doug just went along with it but kind of stared at me with big eyes. I was like, "See, I told you your house was haunted." He was so freaked out. Later my mom ended up getting out of that relationship, but he was like a father to me, so we still are in contact from time to time. He tells me to this day strange things keep happening. Lights will randomly turn on, his stereo has randomly turned on, and he hears noises. Needless to say, I'm glad I no longer live there. I tried explaining this story as best I could, sorry if it wasn't the best explanation. Unexplainable pixie light. I was staying in a cabin in the North Georgia mountains. My friend and I are sitting on the back porch overlooking the woods when we both have that feeling like someone is going to come around the side of the cabin. We are the only ones here, it's remote and on top of a mountain. We see what at first we think is a firefly, yet it's bluish and doesn't blink as a firefly does. It comes around and is approximately 4 inches without form, just an orb of light. As soon as it notices us intently staring, it shoots up into the canopy of trees and lights up the whole canopy in blue light. We both saw it and, to this day, can't explain it. Also completely sober, sans a glass of wine. I was a nursing student in the Philippines when this happened. I don't know what that was, but it still gives me the chills. For context, we don't have a car at the time, so I have to commute every time I leave the house to reach my destination. And there are 3 light poles from the drop-off point to my house. These poles have 3 to 4 regular Filipino houses in between. Mine is located between the 2nd and 3rd light poles. I was on night shift duty at a government hospital in my hometown from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. It was raining that day, but the rain stopped a few hours before my shift ended that night. Because of that, I had a hard time commuting going home, and it was already late when I got a ride home. I arrived at the drop-off point at almost midnight. Since it was rainy season, the dark clouds had covered the moon, and there was not even one star visible. So it was cold and eerily quiet. Like something was wrong. I ignored it and just thought I might be tired. I was already walking home from the drop-off point when I saw that there was a guy by the first light pole. He was standing and leaning on it. He was wearing a hoodie that was on his head and covered his face, so I cannot make out who he is based on his side profile. His was hanging low too, as if he were looking for something with a light in his hands. I thought it was a phone, but it wasn't. As I walked past the first pole, I looked at whoever was leaning on it to see if I knew him. I remembered being confused because I didn't see a face under that hood. Even though there was a light from his hands that appeared to be a phone, it did not illuminate his face. But no, it was pitch black under that hoodie. But I didn't pay it more attention because I was tired and really itching to get home. I just shrugged it off. These light poles, by the way, only shine light in the house where they are placed. So the light doesn't even reach the next house. After a few minutes, I felt something or someone was behind me, but I didn't hear any walking noise. So I looked behind me and saw a very tall dark figure floating behind me. And believe me when I say that this thing doesn't have toes, he is just floating and following me. I hate running, but at the time, I ran for my life. I was screaming as I ran to alert the neighbors, and they heard me. I looked back to see if it was still following me, but it had vanished before I reached the second pole. I pounded on our steel gate as hard as I could so I could be let in by my mom as soon as I got the chance. She freaked out and told her what happened. She didn't believe me until the next day when one of our neighbors complained to my mom about how they were disturbed by the noise I made last night. My mom told her about what had happened. Her eyes went huge and her face got pale. She told my mom that the vacant lot near the first light pole was hot about the paranormal sightings and activity experienced and encountered by the residents. So apparently they said it was a portal to the living and the other side. But the thing that followed me was a first-time incident, so they don't know what that was. After that, I asked my brothers to pick me up from the drop-off point every time that I am on night shift for a while. Never looked at the vacant lot ever again. Back in my late 20s, I started seeing what people usually call shadow people. It happened pretty often when I was living in an old apartment building. At first I would only notice them in the hallways or occasionally in my living room. It was always just a quick glimpse, a dark figure moving where no one should have been. After a while I started seeing it in my bedroom too. That's when it really got unsettling. I never saw clear features, just a dark human-shaped silhouette that would move or disappear when I tried to focus on it. Eventually it bothered me enough that I just left. I didn't give notice or anything, I packed my stuff and moved out. The strangest part is that years later I saw the same type of thing again while staying at my brother's cabin. That's the only other time it's happened. I kept the whole experience to myself for a long time because I didn't want to sound crazy. I still can't explain it. Unexplained knocks on the window at 3 a.m. Help. Hello everyone. So for a couple of months now, I have experienced weird knocks on my window randomly in the middle of the night. It doesn't happen all the time, however, it's been going on for about 3/4 months now, and I know I'm not crazy because my daughter, 8 years old, and my husband, 26 years old, and I, 29 years old, have all heard this. It's my daughter's room, but we all like to be in her room since she has a king-size bed, and we like to watch movies in here since we don't have a TV in our room. There have been many occasions when I have fallen asleep in her room, but each time I do, I suddenly wake up in the middle of the night and start hearing these knocks. I first thought it was a branch or the wind, but there's nothing on the other side, and what's strange is that every time I hear it, it's like 3 a.m., and the knocks are random and have no pattern. However, last night the knocking sounded aggressive. One night, my husband and I fell asleep in my daughter's room while watching movies. She was at her dad's for the weekend, and I suddenly woke up to find my husband getting up and running to the front door down the hall. I felt scared because all I heard him say was, "Who's that knocking at the door?" Even though I didn't hear any knocking. Guys, what do y'all think it could be? We are all religious, my husband is Christian, and I'm Catholic. I also live with my twin sister and brother-in-law, and they have never experienced anything like us. They have 2 dogs, and they seem fine. I know they can sense things we can't. I keep a small altar next to my daughter's bed with holy water, a Virgin Mary statue and a Jesus photo. Unexplainable experience in a small West Virginia town. Seeking insight. Hello. Today my friend and I drove to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, to go to the Mothman Museum. On our way out of town, the GPS directed us to go in the opposite direction from what we expected, and we followed its instructions without questioning why. About 30 minutes into the drive, if that, it tells us to turn down a road that doesn't exist. We instead turn into a small ungated cemetery. When circling to get back on the road, she sees a pile of feathers that looks dumped. I thought it odd, as it looked almost like a whole bird but no blood or body. She picks some up and goes to look past the trees. During these few minutes she is commenting on some of the headstones. Things like, "Look, they died today without a death date, then it's their birthday, it wasn't their birthday." Later, when I asked her in the car, she said she felt disoriented and a bit detached because she was not processing what I was saying at the time. She says it felt like she wasn't in a reality. Like in a dream. At that moment, I felt a strange sensation in my stomach, and after a few moments, she was within feet of me, but I had not yet approached the tree line. In the creek, she thinks it looks pretty and comments that she wants to take pictures to send to her dad. With that, I've finished approaching, and she looks startled and says the person ran off once I reached within what would have been its eye line. She says she heard a sound like something was moving. With that, she saw a barefooted, hairless, pale leg. It appeared to be wearing blue pants. They weren't jeans but were bright blue, and she didn't know if they were ripped or cut, but she could see their calves. The leg she saw was clean, and she noted it was odd how clean it was considering they were in the woods. The feeling in my gut and the look on her face made me feel a need to tell her to throw all the feathers from the car when we were still in the cemetery. She at first didn't want to, but I made her. When I asked why, she said that she just wanted to keep the feathers because they were beautiful and because she felt a need to keep them. We immediately then left when the feathers were placed back outside. As we drove away, she confirmed that there were no houses in the area where she had seen the person. Instead, it was an open field where we definitely would have seen someone. We continued the way GPS was routing us, minus the inexistent road. About a mile up the road, we saw a historical marker about Mark Twain, so we turned around to read it. After reading the historical marker, we continued on the route we initially believed was correct and later confirmed that it was indeed the right way. Still, she comments that she doesn't feel normal or right. I have personally never seen her like this. She says she is feeling disoriented, experiencing intense fatigue suddenly, and honestly feeling a bit sick. I know there are lots of things in the Appalachian Mountains. I was wondering if anyone had any insight on what this particular sighting may be. Several years ago I saw something strange, and I'm still so confused. I don't know what is relevant to this story, so I'll try to be as detailed as possible. So several years ago when I was still a student, I witnessed something strange. It was 4 a.m., and I had just left my dorm room to wake a friend up in another dorm block. On typical days, we would awaken at 5 a.m., however, due to the impending exams, I arose an hour earlier. I had a quick shower and walked over to pick up my friend from her dorm. Now, we didn't have any street lights on our campus, and we were far from the closest town, 5 kilometers. So the area was pretty dark with the exception of the lights emanating from the individual dorm building entrances. Her dorm was around a 3-minute walk. Between her dorm and mine, there wasn't much but a path lined by a short hedge and some trees here and there. Now around a minute away from her dorm, now in view, I saw something. A bright, blinding ball of light roughly the size of a volleyball shot from behind me. I froze. I felt like this thing was watching me. It made no sound at all, and somehow it didn't illuminate the area around it as much for the amount of light it produced. It stayed motionless around 1.5 meters above and in front of me. I remember standing there and wondering what on earth that was. I was frozen, and I had this terrible sense of dread, and I felt paralyzed. Anyway, I remember telling myself to look away and run. But before I could do anything, it kind of just started hovering around and zapped away so fast I feel like if I'd blinked, I'd have thought it disappeared. Suddenly I wasn't terrified anymore, so I looked around behind the tree to see if I could still spot it, but it was gone. Anyway, I bolted to my friend's dorm, but by the time I got there, some people were already awake. And what was supposed to be a 3-minute walk had now been around 25 to 30 minutes. I don't think I spent that much time staring at that thing. I've always wondered what that was, and over the years I saw some wild theories on the internet. I stumbled upon something called a lightning ball, which had the closest resemblance to what I witnessed, but I'm unsure if it's an actual phenomenon. Anyway, I decided to ask here. Has anyone heard of or experienced something similar? Is there something that could logically explain what I experienced that morning? Thank you all in advance. There is something not human out there. I was about 9 years old and living in Suriname. At the time, and it probably still rings true today, it was a poor country with one major city, and the rest of the area was very rural. We lived in one of those rural areas, which you can't even call a town, with our closest neighbor in front of our house, and the next neighbor is miles away. We also lived next to the rainforest. There is no reason for anyone to drive by our area. There is nothing but a dirt road and bushes and trees all around us. We also didn't have TV or any entertainment at the house. My siblings and I would spend our free time reading books, playing with toys, or riding our bikes. And for years, it remained that way. It was a quiet place with few to no visitors. One day, I saw something that changed everything for me. Background about me: I always experienced ghosts as a kid, and I still occasionally do as an adult. I don't seek them out. I had my hair pulled, legs scratched, and words whispered to me when no one was around. I just get used to it, and these are rare occurrences, so I don't think about it much. Back to the story. I was watching the yard dogs play when I saw a white male jogging past our house on the dirt road. The dirt road leads to a dead end. I have never seen this person before. My neighbors are Indian, and they live alone. I asked my mom about that man. She didn't see him and didn't know who I was talking about. He was wearing jogging clothes. I remember he had shorts on. The dogs are guard dogs, but they did not bark or notice him. I couldn't see his face. I didn't think much about him until a few days later, when I saw him again, jogging on the dirt road passing the house. I immediately ran to my bike and decided to follow him. Again, dogs were quiet for some reason. I don't understand why I followed him. It wasn't curiosity. I didn't tell my mom or anyone, which I usually do. I just left with my bike, going slowly behind him, probably about 12 feet away or so. I didn't hear any footsteps. When you run on the dirt road, you will hear something. Gravel, dirt, something. I didn't hear anything. He didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge me, even though I was obviously behind him, following closely. I should have turned back. What was wrong with me? I couldn't stop myself. Something tells me to keep following him. We both said nothing to each other. We made it to the dead end of the dirt road. He keeps running into the grass and straight toward the trees. The grass is tall, about mid-thigh to hip height. No sounds. No rustling. The grass barely bends around him as he tramples through it. He kept going. I got off my bike. As I was about to take 1 foot forward to step on the grass to follow him, I heard my mom's voice to my left, loud and clear as day, calling my name, Maggie. I turned around and said, "What?" No one was there. No one was behind me. I turned back facing forward. That man was gone too. No trace of him. I was alone. I felt a deep chill inside and immediately hopped on my bike and rode home as fast as I could. When I got home, my mom was cooking. She never left the house. And I never saw that man again. I truly believe that thing was not human. I believed I was charmed somehow, lured out from my house on purpose. That was not a ghost or spirit. There are some entities in this world that can't be understood or explained. I hope I never run into that again. Decades later, I met with a psychic medium who told me there is a guardian spirit protecting me, an older woman, but I don't think it's my late great-grandmother. I am not sure how much of that is true, but something snapped me out of it to save me, and I'm forever grateful for it. Seeing a werewolf. Here is what happened. My wife and I, girlfriend at the time, we will call her Marie, were hanging out at our chill spot in a wooded area in the neighborhood I grew up in, Baytown, Texas. To reach the bottom, we had to go down a long decline of about 30 feet, then turn left and trek approximately 60 yards to get to the back. From there, we climbed over the hill, which consisted of a steep incline of about 20 feet, followed by 10 feet of flat ground, and then another steep decline to reach the berm, which faced the creek. I was sitting on top of the berm, and Marie was sitting between my knees a little lower on the 3 feet slope. To my left was the hollow, which dropped about 6 feet from the top of the berm into a bowl-shaped hollow where nothing would grow. Marie and I were watching our friend Ash mess around with the small fire we had going when I heard rustling in the distance, followed by faint breathing, and then something large moved into my peripheral vision. I look over my left shoulder, and I'm eye to eye with this dog with tan/brown fur, champagne-colored eyes, and a long muzzle. It was bipedal and crouched about 3 feet away, just watching. From the time I turned my head to the time Marie and I lit out of there, it was non-threatening. If I had to guess, our reaction time was several seconds. Anyway, Marie and I stood pretty much together and burned off over the hill, out of the back, up the trail to the bottom, and up the ramp to the top. Ash didn't see it and didn't understand why we hauled out of there, but he kept up with us. The werewolf chased us out of there but didn't come out onto the street level. The 3 of us were standing by the street, huffing and puffing, and Ash wanted to know what made us run, and we told him, and he got this look on his face that was triumphant, and he jumped up and down, saying, "See? I told you. I told you. And you said I was crazy." Marie and I didn't go back. That wasn't the only weird thing to happen down there, but it was definitely the one that ended our hanging out down there. Can anyone explain? I've always wanted to tell this story but was never too sure where to share it. I thought that hopefully, by sharing it here, I could get some form of answer or clarification from someone. For context, it was probably 2018, and my friend and I were sat out in his garden at about 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, smoking a cigarette and talking about whatever came to mind. Suddenly, and I still can't explain it, it was like for a split second, the briefest moment, the entire sky seemed to flash black. And then, just as quickly, it returned to its usual blue. It lasted maybe a millisecond, but it was so distinct that we both immediately paused, looked at each other, and said, "Did you just see that?" We both saw it, but neither of us could explain what happened. It wasn't a cloud passing overhead or a shadow cast by something, it was like the entire sky just flickered. We even looked around the garden to see if anything was obstructing the view. No tree or building could cause something like that. Something about it just didn't sit right. Later, I googled it, trying to find if anyone else had experienced something similar or if there was any scientific explanation. I couldn't find anything. I even asked a few people around me, but no one had any insight, and honestly, I started to feel a bit crazy bringing it up. It's like both of us shared this strange experience, but there was no way to explain it, and no one seemed to be able to relate. I don't know if it was a strange atmospheric phenomenon, the lighting, or something else, but I still feel it was unusual. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Or maybe even have a scientific explanation? I'd really like to know if this is something that's happened to other people, or if it's just some weird, unexplainable glitch in reality. I am open to all things paranormal, if not an outright believer in most of them, but I'm also a skeptic who doesn't believe anything blindly. I have had many mild occurrences over the years, which I can usually explain away, but this is the weirdest and most recent. I can't explain this one away. Several months ago I had an overnight visit with a friend, to whose house I wore an old jacket that was my deceased father's. It is an important garment to me, and wearing it makes me feel close to my loving and accepting dad. When I arrived at said friend's house, I hung this jacket on a hook by the door. However, the next day, I couldn't find this jacket anywhere, despite searching everywhere. The house wasn't very big, and there's no way this jacket could have been misplaced or fallen behind something. The friend said he continued to search for it to no avail. But there's more, and it's weirder. I often forget this part when I'm recalling the experience. I got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night, and while I was standing there, I heard from the other side of the wall some muffled footsteps, like someone walking on stairs or down a hall. I also heard a muffled conversation or some kind of quiet talking I couldn't make out. I instinctually assumed I was hearing occupants of a neighboring apartment, but then I realized. My friend lives alone in a single-family home with no attached neighbors. The part of the house I was hearing the sounds from was not an area where people could have been. It was the middle of the night, and my friend was in bed in his room down the hall. Unexplained sighting? It was Thanksgiving, and I was still a child, unsure of my exact age, but that detail is irrelevant. My cousins, probably 5 to 6 total, and I all started playing hide and seek throughout my grandparents' house. We played numerous rounds, and when it came to be my turn to seek, I experienced something that still baffles me to this day. Picture a decently modernized basement with a couch facing a TV that's placed up against one wall, and behind the couch there's probably 20 feet of space where all the kids would sit and play with various toys. It was my turn to count, and so that's what I did. Once I got to 20 or 30 or whatever it was, I stood up and yelled, "Ready or not? Here I come." And when I opened my eyes, I saw a girl sitting in the far corner on the opposite side of the room. She was probably my age at the time, I'd say, and she wore a pink sweater and blue jeans and had very dark black hair. She had her back turned towards me and was looking down as if she were playing with some toys. As soon as I saw her, I said, "Found you. You're it." She glanced back at me and just smiled and kind of laughed and then went back to playing with her toys. I went and found all the rest of my cousins, and we all headed back down to the basement. My one cousin had asked me, "Okay, so who's it?" I had answered with, "I found the girl in the basement first." When we all got back down to the basement, there was no little girl there anymore. My cousins seemed to think I was joking or making things up, but we continued to play, and I have never seen that girl again. The weirdest part about the whole thing is that my whole family has light-colored hair, mostly redheads and blondes. It never really dawned on me until a year or two later that I still hadn't seen that girl again. I've mentioned it to my family numerous times, and they don't have any explanations either. They don't know anyone that could have been there that had super dark black hair. I've always referenced this experience as the girl in the basement. Could I have seen something/someone that wasn't actually there? Did my young mind create a fictional story to scare my cousins, which ultimately ended up scaring me instead? Thanks for listening, and if you have an experience like this, I'd love to hear about it. A tiny UFO? It was the middle of a summer day. My wife and I were walking through a quiet residential neighborhood to get in our car. A short way down the road, we see a small black object very slowly floating out from between two houses. It is about the size and shape of a ream of A4 paper and is absolutely pitch black. Not a single bit of the bright summer sun reflects off it. If you look up Penta Black, you will see what it was like. It's only about 20 feet up and staying at a consistent height. It very slowly moves down the road. We watched it for a good 5 minutes, getting directly under it. It's just a solid black rectangle. The black is so deep it's hard to really make out the edges of it. Doesn't make a sound, doesn't move erratically at all, just slowly floats down the road. Eventually it moves between two other houses and goes out of view. It is the strangest thing I have ever seen, and I have absolutely no explanation for what it might be. I wish at the time we had recorded it, even though it was when mobile phone cameras were crap, at least we would have had some proof of it. We kind of just thought that we would suddenly figure out what it was, though. It was only after it was out of sight we just looked at each other and went, "What the actual F was that?" The second weirdest thing that has happened to us was when my wife woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me there was a fairly large amount of blood on her pillow and she thought she had injured herself in her sleep. There was an area about the size of my palm in her pillow that was soaked with fresh blood, enough that it was not longer soaking in but just sitting on the top. My wife had blood covering one side of her face on her cheek. We had our youngest sleeping in a cot in the room at the time, so I took her out of the bedroom, got a torch and checked her over. I spent a good 15 minutes checking her. There wasn't a single mark on her. Not a spot or a scratch. There was no blood in or around her nose, mouth or ears, nothing in her hair. I checked the ceiling, thinking maybe we had some sort of leak, but there was not a mark anywhere on the ceiling or the walls. I checked the pillow, but there was nothing inside it. We have no idea where the hell this blood has come from. The only thing we could think of was a nosebleed, but there was no sign of blood around or in her nose, and for the amount that was on the pillow, there should have been some sign of it on her nose. I love telling my dad's scary experiences because his are better than the only one I've ever had, but here's mine. I was spending the night at my grandparents' house in California, as I usually did on the weekends when I was a little kid, probably around 6 or 7 years old, when I woke up during the night. We kept a nightlight on in the room between the two twin beds in the room, and my sister was in the bed opposite of me. When I opened my eyes, I saw someone standing there next to the bed but couldn't make out a face. I could see they were wearing what looked like overalls and maybe a wide-brimmed straw hat. No one on that side of the family wore anything like that. I knew that my grandpa in Arkansas was the only person I knew who would wear something similar. It didn't feel right, so I tucked my head under the blanket and went back to sleep. In the morning, I asked if anyone had gone in to check on us and, if so, were they wearing anything like that? No one checked on us. I mentioned this again to family years later, and my dad said it sounded like an old family member may have come to check on me because it sounds like something they may have worn. Others have said that man. I have no idea, but I didn't like it, and this happened like 40 years ago. My grandmother lives at the beach. We live 2 hours away from the beach, and we always go visit her during vacations. When I was younger, I went to visit her with my family. I should clarify that I have always been a person who loves the water. Every time I go, I spend all day in the sea. One of those days we were there, and I went with my mom to fish at the beach. I was mad at her because she wouldn't let me go deep into the sea. She told me to get into tide pools, which I didn't since I like to swim, and I couldn't swim in them. I didn't listen to her and went deeper into the sea. I remember I grabbed onto a rock, and strangely on that rock there was a green slime. I didn't give it importance. My mom kept yelling at me from outside. Suddenly I felt a hand that grabbed my leg and started pulling me inward. It was a hand with long fingers, it had sharp nails, and it was tearing my skin. I screamed, and my mom ran toward me. My mom pulled me out, and that thing let go of me. I still don't know to this day what happened to me. I had an experience when I was 17 years old, and I think about it at least every week. We lived in an old, 1800s farmhouse. The house was a bit strange. Not just because of the age, but because it was split into two distinct and separate eras. We lived in one half of the house that was very clearly the original historic side. Our landlord lived on the other side, which looked like it was straight out of the 70s. I never really questioned it, just thought it was a difference in decorating, until this experience took place. For months after we moved in, I was having these crazy realistic dreams. Some were first-person POV, some were an almost out-of-body experience, witnessing the dream as if it were a TV show, and some were first-person POV but as another person. It was always a woman wearing a blue dress from the 60s, and she was always crying. She was searching for something, but she never found it before I woke up. I finally told my mom about the dreams, and her response rattled me a bit. She told me she was having similar dreams, but instead of a woman in a blue dress, she was dreaming about a baby. She could always hear the baby crying, but she could never find it. She would run around the house searching for the baby, frantic, but never find it. One day when I came home from school, I decided to take a nap before getting to some homework. The dream began, but this time was different. The woman was watching me asleep on the couch. I propped myself up a bit and asked, "Who are you?" And she walked toward me. She reached out her hand as if to help me up off the couch, and I assumed she wanted me to follow her so she could. I don't know, was she trying to show me who she was? I'm not sure. But regardless, I took her hand. It burned. It felt like I had picked up a searing hot cast iron pan with no gloves. The pain was so bad that I jolted awake. I looked down at my hand, and it was bright red. There was an outline that was almost perfectly in the shape of where her hand had been on mine. I was examining my hand, completely in shock, when my mom came home from work. She asked me what was wrong. Actually, what she specifically said to me was, "Geez, you look like you've seen a ghost. Are you feeling okay?" Lol. Suddenly, and with complete certainty, I knew exactly what had happened to that woman. The woman I've been seeing in my dreams. She died in a house fire. Here. She was on the other side of this house. She has been looking for her baby who also died. My mom stopped in her tracks, took a deep breath, and then sat down. I know. Turns out, she had been doing her research after we put the two dreams together. There was a massive house fire in the 60s that had burned half the house down and ended a woman and her 6-month-old baby. They rebuilt it and made the outside look near identical, but the inside told the tale. That's why our landlord's half looked so different. Because it was different. That poor woman was searching for the baby she lost, and she wanted someone to know. I never saw her again after I knew her story. I like to imagine that she just wanted someone to know, and then she could rest. It was the craziest thing I have ever experienced in my life. It's been nearly 15 years, yet the memory remains vivid. I grew up in a historical town with lots of silver mines from the 1800s. When I was 12, a friend and I had decided to breach the doors of one of the historical sites and enter the mines. It was a heavy steel door secured with a chain and padlock. The site was abandoned and surrounded by a chain-link fence. We entered the property and got to work on the chain with a pair of bolt cutters. The moment those cutters broke the chain, we heard a strange sound, like high-voltage electricity, and we could hear a rumbling from inside the mine. We panicked and fled to the perimeter. Before we could get over the fence, the doors opened and an engine/train came out carrying two old guys. Like in their 70s. They were wearing raincoats and carried gear that reminded me of firemen. They called out to us, telling us to stop where we were. Since we could not easily get over the fence again, we decided to stop. They approached us and asked what we were doing. We were sure we'd been caught. They were actually very kind, and they told us that they knew we were trying to enter the mine and gave us a lecture on the dangers that existed just beyond that door. They asked us why we would want to enter. We were honest, beyond the possible adventure, we wanted to look for silver ore. One of the men laughed, reached into his pocket, and produced 2 pieces of silver ore, saying, "Well, here you go. No need to go in there for that." We had a long conversation about the history of the mine. A very sad history about a fire that ended nearly 100 miners. With that, they said they had to get back to work and made us promise we wouldn't enter the mine, to which we of course agreed. They got back on the engine and re-entered the mine, and we went home. We figured that we had been busted but got off easy. Many years later I was working in construction. We were hired to work on the same site to replace the chain-link fence and the doors to the entrance. When we removed the doors, I got to walk inside. The trusses holding up the rail line had collapsed, and you couldn't enter further into the mine. When I inquired about that, the owner of the mine informed me that the rail lines to this tunnel had collapsed in 1970, and there hasn't been power to the area since. I told him my story, and he assured me that it was impossible that an engine could have exited the mine at that location. There hadn't been rails for 30 years at that point. Did I encounter ghosts? Sometimes strange things happen at home. I'm a teen, I live with both of my grandparents from my mother's side. This house I live in at the moment is a very old one, probably built in the 1960s/1970s. A lot of people had lived here and had lived with us, relatives, nannies, and friends. My grandma once told me that someone had died in one of the rooms this house has, and that room once was my mom's. A lot had died here. She'd study there all the time, but sometimes whenever she did, she'd feel a heavy weight on her back, as if someone were on top of her, riding her back, and she couldn't get up, or sometimes she'd feel like someone was watching her, and because of that. My mom barely sleeps there ever since. For years it has been a storage room instead of a room to sleep. Moreover, there are moments where someone would call my grandma's name downstairs, and my grandma would think that it's a friend of hers or a relative asking for help or something else. Once she'd get down and open the door, no one would be there. She told me that it had occurred many times to her. I never believed her stories and thought she was either making things up to scare me or being paranoid. One night, I was sleeping on a long, wooden chair downstairs after watching lots and lots of movies. It was around 4 a.m. that morning. Somebody was calling me by my nickname. I thought that it was my grandpa. I was scared, fearing that he was dying or that I might witness a murder. I got into his room and saw him sleeping very well and comfortably. I went upstairs to check on my grandma because I was worried that my assumptions might have happened to her instead of my grandpa. I saw her fast asleep. I panicked when I arrived and asked loudly, "Are you okay? Did something happen?" I woke her up. She told me everything's all right. That's when I realized that what my grandma told me was true. Occasionally, while I am watching television downstairs or cooking past midnight, I experience the sensation that someone is observing me. I'd stare at the stairs for about a minute, not scared, but worried something might happen to my grandparents. We are not frightened and have already grown accustomed to it. It does not concern us. I just want to share some strange experiences we've encountered. Repeated unexplained activity in my house, looking for possible explanations. I live in a small town in Canada and have lived in the same house since I was around 7 years old. Over the years, I've had several unexplained experiences in this house, and I'm looking for possible explanations, paranormal or non-paranormal. When I was younger, I repeatedly heard doors opening and closing in the basement. On one occasion, I checked immediately and found no one there, no signs of a break-in, and nothing disturbed. Another time, my mother independently noticed and heard the same basement door activity while we were together. A few years later, late at night, I heard a voice calling my name that sounded exactly like my mother. I followed the sound, assuming it was her, but it seemed to come from the basement instead. When I asked her directly, she said she had not called me. There were no other people awake in the house at the time. More recently, 2025, I've had 2 similar incidents involving a reddish-orange light outside my front door late at night. The light gradually grew brighter, illuminated the porch and nearby windows, and then faded away. I never saw anyone approach or leave the door, and when I checked outside, there were no signs of anyone being there. On the second occurrence, I attempted to record it, but the light faded before I could capture anything. There was also a separate incident where I heard heavy movement on my back deck near the glass doors, similar to something searching or moving objects. I did not observe anything directly, and when the noise stopped, there was no visible evidence of an animal or person. I'm not claiming these events are definitely paranormal, and I'm open to rational explanations, structural issues, environmental causes, animals, etc. I'm mainly looking to see if anyone has experienced similar things or has insight into what could explain these events. When I was a kid, my best friend came over to spend the night. I was about 4 or 5 at the time. The year was around 1982. We played with my toys, made a mess of my room and eventually fell asleep, me in my bed and him across the room on the floor in a sleeping bag. In the middle of the night I woke up, and all my toys were alive and doing toy things all over the room. Even my closet had a huge arm swinging out from it. Then I heard my friend ask me if I was awake. I said yes. He asked if I could see what the toys are doing. I said yes, they're moving around. He asked, what do we do? I said I don't know, but I'm scared. We sat there all night watching the toys. Being scared. Ultimately we both fell asleep again. We woke up in the morning to find the room completely destroyed. It was an absolute mess that went unreasonably further than the mess we made the evening before. My mum was pissed at us, and we tried to explain, but of course she didn't believe us. The following year my best friend moved away, and I didn't see him for another 10 years or so. We had no contact over that decade. But somehow our parents contacted each other, and we set up a visit. Now teenagers, we were basically strangers. Young men. When the adults went off and we started hanging out, the first thing he asked me was, do you remember that night with the toys? And I shouted yes. All these years I thought it was just kids' imagination stuff and that night wasn't real. But he remembered it too and described everything we saw together that night in detail. We both felt vindicated, as our mutual experience was just too bizarre to believe it was real. We never told anyone about it and never spoke about it until that day. When I was around 11 years old, I just started sleeping in my bed again after having had pretty brutal nightmares for a year. It was around the second month of sleeping in my room when I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night sweaty and, at the same time, very cold. The time was around midnight, and when I tried to go to sleep, the most disturbing sound I had ever heard entered my ears. Someone or something was walking downstairs with high heels. At first, I just thought it might be my little sister or mom, but it didn't make sense since my mother strictly forbade any footwear to be used inside the house. At this point, I became a little scared and knocked on the wall leading to my parents' room, but there was no response. After I had knocked, I heard that the footsteps stopped downstairs. I got a little calmer and realized it must have been my mom downstairs, and she probably heard the knocking. It was quiet for some time, and I tried to go back to sleep when suddenly I heard that the high heels footsteps came up the stairs really fast. I panicked and went under the covers. The next 10 minutes of my life are still the most traumatic minutes I have experienced. The footsteps went back and forth in the hallway outside my room. To my parents' room to my left and back to my sister's room to my right. All of a sudden the person or whatever it was stopped walking, right outside my room. At this moment, I was so close to my breaking point and just wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, I heard the being outside my door tiptoeing into my room. It walked in circles in the middle of the room before stopping right in front of my bed. At this moment it was fight or flight. I slowly peeked under the blanket just to be greeted by a deformed girl's face smiling the biggest smile I've seen. I went into full panic mode, screamed as loud as I could, catapulted out of bed, ran into my parents' room, and continued screaming for several hours. I never told anyone of what I saw that night. I always thought it was some sort of sleep paralysis. One day a year ago, while I was talking with my sister, she began to recount that terrible night when she heard the footsteps of high heels in the hallway. Just the thought of this whole thing sends shivers down my spine every time. Unexplained paranormal moments. To this day in my home, my mom, I, and my grandma when she was still alive have heard my grandpa, who is her husband, outside when he was still at work at a school. I often heard the same thing several times. When I spent a few days in the hospital for an injury I caused, my grandma heard my laugh at home. I had heard my dad's voice talking. When I looked, he was not here. I once saw what I believed to be my mom, so I followed her into a room where the entity disappeared and my mom was asleep in her bed. I once heard my mom and grandma whispering, and the moment I looked to see, they were both asleep, and when I entered my grandma's room, the two voices stopped. The entity had taken on my appearance and walked into my mom's bedroom while I was using the bathroom on the other side of the house. My mom called out my name and was surprised when she saw me coming out of the bathroom. I once heard my grandma ask me what I wanted from the store, so I told her what food I wanted her to get me, as my grandma asked me who I was talking to, and I realized it wasn't my grandma talking to me since she had just come back into the house and heard me talking. I don't know what this is and would love to know, and I hope they aren't bad. They do confuse us a lot until we realize what just happened. The entity who looked like my sister in my bedroom. I just want to start by saying I'm not someone who believes in ghosts. The idea intrigues me, but I believe they aren't real. I don't mostly share stuff like this, however, with what I'm going to share, I thought I needed to share to get some clarification or some idea of what happened. So, last year, around September to October, I can't remember the exact month, I remember going to sleep. Now I'm a heavy sleeper, a nuclear bomb could go off, and I would sleep through it. However, this wasn't the case with this problem. I remember waking up at exactly 4:40 a.m. to a feeling of something heavy weighing down on my chest. It was heavy enough to wake me. I opened my eyes, and to my surprise a woman is lying on me with her eyes locked onto mine. Now, to absolutely nobody's surprise, I had an almost heart attack-like experience when I saw this was the worst scare of my life. You couldn't even imagine it. Quick thinking led me to launch myself out of bed, making the woman hit the ground. At this point, any dream or nightmare would have woken me up, but this felt real, so real that I could feel the body on top of me and heard it hit the ground with a thud. I immediately turned my lights on and rushed to get my makeshift weapon. Yes, I have a stick I've built to ward off intruders, from under my bed. This woman then scurries down the hallway. She looks at me and turns her head all the way around so her eyes meet mine even though her body hasn't moved. For someone real to have done this, they would have needed to break their neck, and in the hallway I get a better look at the face. It's scarily, honestly to God, one for one looked exactly like my sister's. I then proceeded to chase it down the hallway and scream my sister's name so loud it woke my parents. Once I got down the hallway, it's not very big, the creature disappeared. Naturally, I checked on my sister, and she hadn't moved. I'm not going to assume it was her doing something dodgy, as we have a healthy relationship, and when I went there, she was in deep sleep. I went and checked all the wardrobes and stuff with my parents to check there wasn't actively an intruder in my house. I don't know what this was, I don't believe for a second it was my sister, and I don't believe it was a ghost or demon. I am Christian and don't have anything that would attract such things, not to say they are real, anyway, however, I won't deny the realism of it and the unexplainable part of it. I've never had an experience where I woke up and felt with my body and hands a genuine living thing like this. How often do you hear ghost stories that involve someone actually touching the entity? Note that I don't take drugs and am very healthy and don't have any mental issues besides ADHD. I don't know how to explain this, I sleep well now and, TBH, don't think much of it. I now sleep with my door closed. If you don't think this is real, then you're like me, take it from a skeptic that these things don't seem real until something unexplainable happens. I know what I saw, but I'm attributing it to something like sleep paralysis. Any info will help as to what this could have been. Unexplained experience in a park at night. Hello. I am a 25-year-old man from Belgium. Last night around 10 p.m., I experienced something that I find difficult to place and about which I would like to hear other people's opinions. Normally, I try to think rationally, and I'm skeptical of the paranormal, but I consider all possible explanations. Yesterday, I walked to a nearby night shop using a route I've taken many times before. The shortest way goes through a local park. The park is relatively small, surrounded by busy streets, and it is not lit at night. On my way back, I walked past an athletics track. On the opposite side, there is a building belonging to an athletics club with a cafeteria. I was at the far end of the track, while the building was on the long side across from me. When I stepped out of a wooded area into the open part of the track, I heard someone whistling behind me. I turned around instinctively but saw no one. I assumed it could have been a walker with a dog. A few seconds later, I heard laughter coming from the wooded area behind me. It sounded like a female voice. The laughter itself sounded fairly normal, but there was a tone to it that I found hard to place and that made me feel uncomfortable. For that reason, I started walking faster towards the exit near the athletics club building. Shortly after, I suddenly heard a lot of bird sounds around the track. It sounded like intense morning birdsong, even though it was already dark. I found this very strange and unsettling, as I had never experienced anything like it before. I decided to leave the park as quickly as possible and started running. While running, I heard a loud bang or a sound as if something hit or fell from the building. I cannot say for sure what it was. Out of fear, I did not leave the park through the normal exit but pushed my way through bushes and trees to get back onto the street as quickly as possible. Since then, I've been left with the feeling that someone was nearby or watching me, although I cannot objectively prove that. I am open to both scientific and possible paranormal explanations. I'm sharing this because I genuinely want to understand what might have happened, not to seek attention. Help me explain this. I've grown up seeing a lot of unexplained things, but this occurrence is something I don't think I will ever be able to explain. This incident happened to me back in 2022 when I was on a family trip around Europe. We had just gotten to our hotel called the Royal Highland in Inverness, Scotland. It was a beautiful old Victorian hotel built in 1856. The whole trip my sister and I had separate rooms from my parents and brother, which was nice because my brother is fairly loud. But as soon as we got to our room, I immediately felt off. I closed the heavy door, which produced a loud bang, and I placed my bags on the bed, as did my sister. The room didn't have a TV, so we watched Netflix on our phones until it was time for dinner. Around 6 p.m., we got up and both started to get ready. I walked over to the vanity and was doing my hair. While I was doing my hair, I was talking to my sister, just basic small talk, about what she was going to wear. I started doing my makeup when she walked past me to look over at the window. I looked at her and asked what she was doing, but she didn't say anything and went back to the bathroom. We then started talking again, but this time she kept asking me to come to the bathroom. I was getting frustrated with her because I was focusing on doing my makeup, but I finally said, "Okay, Amy, I'm coming." She stopped talking and wouldn't respond to anything else I was saying. Frustrated, I walked over to the doorway of the bathroom, but she wasn't there. No sign of her, nothing at all. Not even her hair products, which she had just used, were on the counter. I got a really awful feeling and immediately grabbed my stuff and ran out of the room. As soon as I got out of the room, I got a call from my sister, who was pissed at me because she had been waiting in the lobby for 30 minutes, saying she had called me multiple times. I hadn't received a single call of hers until I left the room. My heart dropped, I didn't know what to say. My parents were freaked out about it and contacted the staff for security footage. We reviewed the footage, and no one had gone in or out of that room besides my sister, who left 30 minutes prior to this happening. To this day, I still can't explain what I saw or who I was talking to, but I can assure you that whatever or whoever that was I was talking to was trying to get me to come into the bathroom. I'm glad I didn't stay. This just happened to me a week or so ago. If anyone's experienced something similar, please let me know. I have an issue. I'm in my 40s and have no past hallucinations. I would describe myself as sensitive and open-minded. My BF and I, who have been together for 21 years, decided to do shrooms last week, not the first time, it's just been years. They are semi-legal where I am, so he went to a store and got them. Midwest US. The first night, we took more the next night, and everything was fine and normal. We took a small amount, he ate one about 3 inches in length, and I ate 2 smaller caps, dime and nickel sized for perspective, and we both ate a 25 mg edible. Normally, 25 mg edibles would do nothing for me, I usually take 100. He also drank a few beers and proceeded to fall asleep on the couch, which is close to the kitchen doorway that is open and has no door. From my vantage point in the kitchen, I can only see his feet on the couch. I'm coloring at the table, and I'm in my zone, so I'm coloring for hours while he's sleeping. The TV is right across from me, about 15 feet straight ahead, and it's a 70-inch screen playing, I think, The Boys. I'm not really feeling the shrooms, I just feel very focused, and I'm like pondering and thinking about microdosing more often, and I'm staring into the living room when I see this black shadow. It is very well defined with well-defined edges, it is very human-shaped, the head, shoulders, arms and torso being most visible, but I can see its legs, just not as clearly. It came flying out of my boyfriend with such force that it windmilled its arms like it was going to fall backwards, and then it took off towards the hall but disappeared. The TV backlit the entire scene, which is why I believe I was able to see it so clearly. The light was not very vibrant, giving it an almost misty appearance. The way it looked, I'll try to explain. Along the edges of its body, the shadow was darker, like it was highlighted in an even darker shadow. No hair seemed to be man-shaped. I immediately think, okay, the shrooms are shrooming. I've never seen anything like this before, so I'm intrigued that such a small dose is working so well. I felt compelled, literally compelled, something said, "Go do it now," to go in and tell it that it needs to leave and that it's not welcome here, and I do the sign of the cross over my sleeping boyfriend. This pissed it off and took it from a shroom experience to now I think I need a real priest. I sat back down at the table right after crossing my BF out. My dog is 5 feet directly in front of me in the doorway, we're both facing, looking into the living room, just kind of waiting to see if anything happens. This thing comes from around the corner and makes a motion at my dog like it's going to hit it, like it stomped its foot and pulled both fists up at my dog. This thing got low and in my dog's face, and my dog, he literally reacted to it and pulled his face away quickly, like he was seeing exactly what I was seeing. So I say once again, louder, "You don't belong here, leave." But now I'm ducking freaking, and I get a hammer, like, WTF was that going to do? But I was scared. I wasn't scared until the dog reacted. Before that I was chill. It goes over to my fridge and, I don't know, punches it? I can't see it again. It made a loud bang and made the dogs start freaking out and barking their heads off. I have 2 dogs, but it only tried to punch one of them. I'm not religious like that, I believe in reincarnation. Should I start? Was it my boyfriend having an OBE, and I stopped him from getting back in his body? Was it a demon? It does seem more quiet since I told it to go, almost more peaceful. The dogs had been barking at a lot of nothing lately. I walked around my house reciting the exorcism prayer I found on Catholics Online. It sounds absolutely ducking ridiculous, but this happened, and now I don't know what to think or do because I thought I was just going to have a crazy shroom story, and then my freaking dog had to go and be like, "Yeah, I see that too." Oh, and BF did not wake up during that whole time, and honestly, it happened very fast. I would say maybe 3 minutes from when it jumped out of my BF to when it punched my fridge. Does anyone have any advice, or has anyone else experienced something similar? Should I bless the house? I'm going to get some crosses put up over the doorways. Also wanted to say shrooms and weed and alcohol are all we do, no meth, no crack, no coke. He works full-time doing windscreen repair. I'm in retail management, we have a 4-bedroom home and 1 teenager still here with us. Just to show I'm a responsible, clear-headed individual. Unexplained strange childhood story. So I was just watching creepy videos and saw one that reminded me of a story someone I knew in 4th grade would tell me repeatedly. In 4th grade, I was a lonely kid who had a hard time making friends, but I managed to befriend a girl who was blonde and had an eccentric personality. She would tell a lot of paranormal stories and claimed that many paranormal things haunted her. Like seeing Japanese urban legends in the bathroom. But more specifically, she claimed that nightly or almost nightly she would see me and another girl in our class come into her room at night. Keep in mind I've suppressed this entire experience because it's very unpleasant and embarrassing for me to remember, so I might not get the details perfect, but this is the gist of it. One of the apparitions resembled me exactly, while the other resembled an Asian girl from our class who was also friends with her and always carried a dagger. They would enter that girl's room at night and intimidate her. She told me that when I went away on vacation in India, the apparition that looked like me became much clearer and more real, or perhaps it became more blurry. I can't remember the details clearly, but I believe the apparition became clearer. And once she and I did an experiment to see if the apparition was real, and we asked a question and left the paper in one of the classroom cubbies, and the paper had no written on it in what looked like my handwriting, to me at least, although that could have been imitated since it was a pretty general large no on the paper and not anything distinctive, with a marker in a color I knew I had, and every time I'd see that marker color in my house, like randomly lying in the living room, I'd feel so scared and feel dread wash over me. It was a fuchsia type color. And we, or just she? I don't remember coming up with the names Gaggy for the apparition of me and Daggy for the other girl since my name starts with a G and that other girl's apparition carried a dagger. So what could that have been? I'm not very familiar with apparitions and paranormal things, and thankfully, I haven't had personal experiences with them. However, for years after that, until maybe 6th or 7th grade, I was haunted and tortured by the fear that whatever this version of me was doing could be sending me to hell, and it truly messed with me constantly for weeks to months at a time. I have suppressed the memory for years, dismissing it as a fabrication that the girl must have concocted for attention. However, the plethora of supernatural stories available has prompted me to reconsider it from a different perspective. So my question is, what do you think that was? Was it real? And why did one of them look like me? The man in the fence and the little girl. The man in the fence. I loved playing in our backyard. We had a swing, a trampoline and a big rabbit house, and if anything happened, we could go to my sister fast if she were home. I was minding my own business at the swings when suddenly I heard something scratching besides me, at our fence. We had a big old wooden fence with two sides, and in the middle part it was hollow, but only by a centimeter or two. It was two-sided, so you couldn't see through. I looked at the fence after hearing the scratch and didn't see anything at first. It kept going, but I still couldn't see anything. I was not that old, so I played, ran around and was just in my own little world. The scratching stopped, and there was silence for a while. But suddenly I was interrupted by a manly voice calling out. At first I thought it was my foster dad, but when I looked around for him, he was nowhere to be found. I heard the voice again, louder. "Hey, I'm here. Help." I looked around, and then I saw him. The man in the fence. He was stuck, he wanted to get out. Only his eyes were visible, and he looked empty but scared. I ran away from there as fast as I could, found my foster dad, and told him what had just happened. He ran down to the backyard and looked everywhere for the man. But he was gone. I showed him where exactly he was, but there was nothing to be seen. I never saw him again, but many years later the fence fell and broke because of a storm. When we separated the fence, there were deep scratches on the wood inside. We were all quite freaked out, to put it mildly. The little girl. I had a fantasy friend for quite some time. Her name was Ida, and we were always together. I even named my teddy after her. We played games, played on the swings and did everything else. But one day, she started to act weird. She started asking if I would ever forget her. If I had other friends, I would understand why she was acting that way. I was tiny, so I can't remember many details, but I know she started to scare me. I saw her sitting under the stairs, hiding. Her shadow was suddenly behind me, and I even started to see her standing in the window in my room when I wasn't there. One day when I was drawing, I dropped something behind my radiator. I looked through it to look for it, but instead I saw Anna looking back at me. Completely pale skin, black around the eye and a big black pupil staring back. I got so scared I jumped up, fell forward and slammed my head down on the corner of the table. I still have a scar here almost 15 years later and have a weird fascination with eyes, even though it really scared me. I didn't hear or see Ida after that, but she is still sometimes in my head. My best friend and I were driving home from downtown, likely around midnight. We were driving around and got a little lost and wound up in this mostly abandoned neighborhood. It was raining a little, and there were no other cars around. We drove past a house with boarded up doors and windows, encircled by a cast iron fence. In the front yard, there was a group of maybe 15 to 20 people, all dressed in nice black clothes, as if they were at a funeral. They were surrounding a man who was holding what looked like road flares, except he was holding them directly in his hands. I remember this really well because I wondered how he wasn't being burnt. On the ground before him were more of the flares, 5, I think, assembled into what I can only assume was a circle, and there was something/someone lying in the center. Despite us being the only car around, only one person looked at us, a man smoking a cigarette. As we drove past, I said to my friend, half joking, "Hey, I think they're worshipping the devil." As we got closer, I began to feel weird, so I said, "Wait, I think they may actually be worshipping the devil." We decided to drive around the house, which stood alone, no other houses around it, and this took maybe all of 20 seconds. By the time we were on the other side of the house, everything was gone. No smoke, nothing left behind. All the doors and windows were boarded up, there was no way those people could have run inside or anywhere else. They were just gone. As we drove home, we were mostly silent, and both felt sick to our stomachs from the weird unexplainable thing that just happened, so we tried to lighten the mood. We were both attending a Baptist Christian college, so we decided to lighten the mood by jokingly saying, "Rebuke this in the name of God," and essentially poking fun at demons, God, and the entire situation. That night, we both began having nightmares. I kept having nightmares of two demonic figures, and I would also see them as I was trying to fall asleep. The fear was so intense that it caused me to wake up. My friend had similar nightmares. Additionally, on multiple occasions, my friend and I would be seated on the couch, socializing, when the air would suddenly take on the scent of someone having lit a cigarette in close proximity. Things like this happened for a month, and we were both terrified. The last straw was when I was home alone, and I heard my bathroom door slowly shut and then heard the lock click. I am certain that I was the only one at home. Seconds later, the room started to smell like cigarettes. I left the apartment so quickly that you wouldn't believe it. After that, my friend and I literally had two of our friends come to pray over our apartment, and after that everything stopped. Pro tip, don't make fun of the devil. Something strange happened to my family and me this early morning. Seems unexplainable. It was around approximately 3:30 a.m. We were all sleeping until my mom and I heard a loud crash from downstairs. Like something heavy fell onto one of the tile surfaces. Then we heard the floor creak for a couple of seconds. We both met in the hallway upstairs like a couple of minutes later, since we are both light sleepers and we easily heard it. At first we assumed it was my brother because often he stays up that late and might have been walking around, but we found the door to his room shut, which meant he was sound asleep. So then we suspected someone might have broken into our house and was sneaking, or it was some kind of animal, so we listened for a little bit more before I decided to check it out myself to be safe. I even peeked from the staircase first to see if I could catch a glimpse of anything. Throughout our house, we have sliding glass doors that serve as windows, each equipped with an exterior screen and interior shades. Therefore, we always need to keep a stick for all of them to prevent anyone from opening them, just in case. We also have a security system. I woke my brother up to come with me. I gave my mom my cell to call the police in case someone was there. I had my baseball bat and he had his gun, but we didn't find anyone. Nothing. We checked every possible area in the house where something could have fallen. Especially the bathrooms, the kitchen, and the washroom, since those are the surfaces it sounded like it fell on. The rest of the house is carpet. But everything was in its original place before we went to bed. It was just so weird. We tried to explain it away by saying we were just dreaming, but there is no way. That was too loud for that to be an imagination, and my mom heard it too. We spent the next hour listening for other sounds, but we didn't hear anything else other than the dryer I turned on downstairs. I really don't want to jump the gun and be like, it's a ghost or entity in our house, but this seems unexplainable. If someone were genuinely trying to break into our house, we would have definitely heard it and seen evidence, because the sliding glass doors require significant effort to break. They're not made of cheap glass at all, unless we forgot to lock them, which we usually don't, or failed to place the security sticks, allowing someone to notice and attempt to enter. Even then, we have a security system that would notify us which door was open, so someone definitely didn't break in like we thought. Nothing was touched. This part is disputable and is most likely the way my mom arranged some objects in her room for it to happen, but when I see my mom's room at night, there is this shadow I see standing that almost looks exactly like some small girl with pigtails. It's been there for a month now, or 2 months. The shadow is caused by the nightlight in the hallway, and the light shines into her room, but I just found it strange how the shadow looks. It's as if someone is standing in the hallway a few feet away and looking into her room, but nothing is there in the hallway, so I have no choice but to conclude that it's a collection of objects in her room causing that shadow. But that night/morning I didn't see the shadow at all. It was completely gone. However, my mom rearranged some items in her room while cleaning a section of the floor that day, so the shadow is likely unrelated. Which I really do hope for, because that entire situation was scary. I wonder what it all was. I want to say it came from outside, but that sound was in here for sure. It would have sounded different if it were coming from the outside. And it sounded like something really heavy. There was nothing on the counters or tables that was as heavy as that object sounded. Something unexplainable is happening in my grandmother's old house, and it is affecting my mom. My grandmother lived alone in her large house in the middle of the city for almost 30 years. She never wanted to live with anyone, and she never really got along with her children, but she prayed every single day for hours. When my mom was around 15, a church father was invited to bless the house, and he said he felt something was wrong. He told them that something abnormal kept interrupting the prayer and he could not focus properly. Years later, my grandmother was still living there alone. She hired some workers to do construction work at the back of the house. They slept outside under the shed at night because that area has trees and a nice breeze. They told my grandmother they heard a woman crying intensely at night, and on one night they saw a lady with long hair standing there. They were so terrified that they ran away and never came back to finish the work. My mom loved my grandmother and took care of her when she got seriously sick these last 2 years. She brought her back to health, but my grandmother still spoke badly about my mom to others. She wanted to experience many things she had missed in life, and she passed away recently at our place. My mom was heartbroken and took her to her house for the last rites. The night of the funeral or the day after, my mom was lying on her bed when she felt something like a fingernail tapping her a few times. After that she felt a heavy pressure on her chest and shoulder, like someone was sitting on her. She said she instantly knew something was going to happen to her. She struggled to even climb stairs and had to use her hands to pull herself up. She asked my dad to book a doctor appointment because she felt something was slipping out of her control. On the way to the clinic, they passed by a church where a feast for a saint was happening. They went inside. The saint is known for blessing people by placing 2 candles in an X shape on their neck. As soon as my mom received the blessing, all her pain disappeared instantly. She was completely confused by how sudden it was. Earlier, when she first felt the pain, she had told someone she trusted. That person said something similar had happened in their family and that a spirit had affected someone. They also said that people who get possessed usually face death within 30 days. 2 days later we had to send one of our staff to my grandmother's house. She called us and said a huge tree in the backyard had fallen with the entire root lifted out. There was no storm, no wind, and no weather event. It was a normal sunny day. This happened last week. Yesterday the same staff told my mom that she has not been feeling well ever since she went to that house, and she is having the same symptoms my mom had. My mom was shocked. She now believes something is wrong with that house and that my grandmother's constant prayers were keeping whatever it was under control. Without her there, everything is starting to come out. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I honestly do not know what to think. I grew up in a poltergeist house in Lansing, Michigan. The activity there was constant, but here's one of my experiences. The entrance to the attic was in an unusual place, upstairs, inside the only bathroom. The entire inner surface of the attic door was covered in names, continuing up the wall beside it as if the door couldn't contain them all. Some were scribbled in ink, while others were carved into the wood. I never knew why they were there, but those hundreds of names only added to the unease in that part of the house. The staircase leading up to the attic was narrow, allowing just enough room for one person at a time. Rushes of cold air hit your face as you climbed toward the eerie top floor, warning you to turn back. Once inside, the air became thick, unmoving, and uncomfortably warm until the blasts of ice-cold air returned with force. The contrast never made sense. The gusts were always accompanied by the feeling of being watched and an urgent need to leave. In all the years I lived there, I only stepped past the attic door a handful of times, and for good reason. Something lived up there. The sound of heavy footsteps walking above the bedrooms was heard regularly, but it didn't compare to hearing them when I was supposed to be alone in the bathroom. There was an entity that stomped down the attic staircase that ran behind the wall, forcing me to rush out as soon as I had the chance. When I couldn't leave quickly enough, I'd hear it stomp all the way to the bottom step, then stand in complete silence on the other side of the door. The tension was unbearable. Over the years, I learned to cope with it, to simply breathe through those encounters. But one night, that method wasn't enough to deal with the unwanted company. I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when I suddenly felt like I was being watched. Without a sound, the energy of a familiar presence crept up behind me, demanding my attention. Then, I heard someone stomp aggressively down the old wooden steps. They crashed all the way to the bottom and stopped. I'd heard this plenty of times before, but this was especially dramatic. Someone stood there in complete silence. Frozen and wide-eyed, I waited for something crazy to happen, expecting the door to swing open. The entity blasted me with its negative energy. I felt like I was being threatened. My mother and brother were in their rooms, and a single thought echoed in my mind: what kind of otherworldly being was behind the attic door? I took a deep breath and cleaned up as quickly as I could. Before I left, the entity stomped back up the stairs. I gasped, ran down the dark hallway, and shut my bedroom door. That was the first time I'd ever heard it go back up after stopping at the bottom. Even though I knew I was protected, it wasn't easy getting to sleep that night. Unexplained stalking in the Nevada desert. For some context, I'm a seasonal wildland firefighter in the Pacific Northwest during the summer. The PNW wasn't my home, though I would drive out there, usually a 3 to 4 day trip. Fire season had ended, and we held a large departure party before everyone returned home the next morning. It was early October, and autumn was already taking hold in most of the western states. I set out on my drive at about 9 a.m. I had planned on doing 10 hours of driving for the first day so I could shorten the trip by a day in the long run. Whenever I travel like this, I always plan my endpoint for the night around a rest stop so I have a secure public place to sleep. For my first night, the stopping point was the Leonard Creek Rest Area, located between Denio and Winnemucca, Nevada. It's an extremely desolate area. I saw maybe 3 cars total in the 2 hours I drove from the Oregon-Nevada border to the destination after dark. I arrive at my camping spot for the night. From what I can make out, there are no lights. It's a gravel parking lot about the size of 2 football fields side by side. There are 2 driveways and a little building that's a pit toilet located across from one driveway on the edge of the lot, the furthest side from the road. I park opposite the pit toilet, still near the back of the lot, wanting to avoid being awoken by cars visiting the building while asleep. I have an SUV, and my routine for this situation is to reconfigure some of my stuff in the back to the front passenger seat so I can lie in the back with the seats down. As I'm outside, I take note that the terrain is pretty flat, covered in rocks and dirt with the occasional short, dry grass. Besides that, no other flora. I climb in the back, lock all the doors, and get comfy. I'm lying there, I'm watching videos, trying to fall asleep. Right as I start to drift off, I get startled awake by the sound of something brushing against the front driver's fender. Sitting up, I grab my handgun sitting beside me and crawl over to the driver's side to peer out the window. As I look out, I can see a very short perimeter around the vehicle. It's nearly pitch black besides the tiny illumination from the stars. My first thought is grass or shrubs brushing against the outside in the breeze. But I see no plants or grass, only dark gravel. No animals or movement. I think back, and the air was even still while I was outside. The thought briefly crosses my mind to go outside and check it out to set my mind at ease. I was just out there after all. Immediately I push that idea away, realizing that's typically the first kill in horror movies. So I lie back down, setting the weapon aside and resuming from where I left off. Again I hear the sound, this time right next to me at the back of the vehicle, so I grab for my weapon again and lie there frozen, listening. Every few minutes, the sound occurs again in a different location from the last, as if something were circling me. I sit up, phone in one hand, gun in the other, looking out the windows from as many sides as I can see. While also texting a friend of mine about what's going on in my location in case something happens. The sound continues for about an hour, and I finally fall asleep without realizing. My exhaustion from the long drive and hangover from the night before catch up to me. My vehicle rocks back and forth violently, waking me up. I look out to see small multicolored strobing lights and a craft touching down 100 feet next to my car. I realize it's a helicopter. As the rotors spool down, about a dozen police cruisers lights off drive past the helicopter and make a turn going away from the parking lot. The direction on the map is west. Roughly 4 to 6 cruisers pull alongside the helicopter, one at a time, talk to a man attaching what looks like rappelling gear, and leave out the opposite driveway they entered from in the same direction as the others. I stay up observing for as long as I can handle, photographing the helicopter, knowing I won't believe it in the morning, and fall asleep at an unknown hour. When I wake in the morning, it's as if nothing happened the night before. I begin going over theories for the second part of the night with the information I have. My first one was a medical evac, no ambulance was ever on scene, and the heli wasn't kept hot, the engine was shut off immediately upon landing. Maybe a drug raid, it's flat, empty desert as far as I can see. I take a look at the satellite view of the map, there are no houses or buildings in that area. Nighttime training exercises almost 2 hours from the nearest town? I'm stumped. So I go search for evidence of animals in the vicinity, tracks, feces, hair, and bedding spots. It felt surreal, it was all a fever dream, but I had photos of the helicopter and the texts I sent my friend out of fear. To this day I'm still not fully sure what happened out in the desert that night or if the events were even related. I've told the story to people close to me over the last couple of years, and someone finally convinced me to share it to hear the takes from others online. I've had a lot of weird experiences, some downright strange. But one experience in particular stands out. I haven't been able to catalog it or find others who have experienced anything like it, even online. One night I was spending the night outside on a trampoline with some friends. There were 4 of us, and indeed, the trampoline sagged in the center and began to pull us in. It was very uncomfortable lol. I can't remember the exact year, but it was sometime between 2012 and 2014. East Coast. Late summer/early fall. It was around 2 to 3 a.m. And we were talking, although I can't even remember the topic at this point. While my buddy is in the middle of talking about whatever, the sky suddenly turns on. Like bright blue daylight. No clouds. It was an evenly dispersed blue throughout the whole sky. My buddy stopped talking mid-sentence, and we were all deathly quiet. After about 2 or 3 seconds, the light turned off again. Dark night sky, no clouds. There were some stars, but it was in the suburbs, so city lights diluted them. After a few seconds, we all started freaking out, asking what had just happened and confirming that we had all witnessed the same thing. Unfortunately, it happened so quickly and unexpectedly that I didn't get a chance to process if the objects below, like houses and trees, were lit up by the sky. My back was on the trampoline, so I was looking straight up. The weirdness didn't even stop there. After about 15 to 20 minutes of us talking about this and being a mix of excited and freaked out, this car pulls up slowly into the front yard of the house we were at. The headlights were off. It was an old car, I didn't know makes or models at the time. But in retrospect, I want to say it looked like a 90s Lincoln. The trampoline was in the backyard, but we could see the front yard from there, and the car pulled up to the curb in front of the house. Strangely, it didn't go up far enough to be directly in front of the house but stayed where we could see it. We were all silent and frozen. After a while, it drove away quietly. Keep in mind this is around 3 a.m. One friend suggested it could be an early mailman, but I don't understand why they sat there quietly or kept their headlights off. Another suggested they might have been scouting the house and didn't know about us back there, but the coincidence of happening right after that was uncanny. I looked online for this after that. Tried searching it in all kinds of ways. I couldn't really find anything when searching for the night sky turning to day. I ruled out heat lightning because there were no clouds. And even if there were, when I say the sky turned on, I'm not being dramatic. It turned daytime. I found one random video that was what I had experienced. The video was Russian and featured some drunk teenagers acting like hooligans at night. It was recorded with some kind of low-quality handheld camcorder. In that video, the sky did exactly what it did to me, turned gray for a few seconds. They all stopped what they were doing and looked up, then at each other, stunned. Then they started laughing and saying random things in Russian. I have searched for this video since but couldn't find it again. To this day my friends that were there verify that the event actually occurred. That's the main thing keeping me certain that it wasn't just some weird vivid dream. Unexplained whistling. Anyone else? About a year and a half ago I was on the phone with a friend. We were talking on FaceTime when all of a sudden there was a clear as day whistle coming from the left side of my room. She heard it over the phone speaker, I heard it, and we agreed it was spooky as hell but might have been just something else unexplainable. I had just gotten back from staying with a friend of mine the night before, but there was nothing unexplainable that happened in her house and nothing that I heard of that was paranormal to her. Throughout the following year, I heard the whistle a few times, but the last experience was the scariest. This entire time the whistle was the same flat note and tone, and it would happen once. One night, I was unable to sleep at all. I experienced intense anxiety and felt as though I was being observed, but I attributed it to paranoia. It was around 4 a.m. when I went to try and sleep again for the last time, and I was lying there in the stone-cold silence with a terrified feeling like I was waiting for something to happen. And as if the night couldn't get any worse, I heard the whistle again. Not once but twice, and it was a song. Even typing this makes me feel crazy, but I know I'm not because of how real this was. It was a simple whistle, no more than 3 notes, and the song lasted about 5 seconds. The first time I heard it, I squinted my eyes shut as hard as I could and froze. I couldn't move. And then I heard it again and waited a minute before getting up to turn all the lights on. My anxiety is bad, but it doesn't create hallucinations. Does anyone have any idea what's going on or anyone that could help me not feel so crazy? Was on a deer hunt, had been sitting in our blind all day, and the weather had been really odd. We had rain from a clear sky. The wind would shift from being uncomfortably still to blowing too fast to shoot within minutes, and I heard a handful of thunder rolls from the clear sky. None of that is unexplainable, but it is odd. The animals were being strange as well that day. We did not see any in our hunting area, and the few we did see were all running. Not walking, not prancing, but running. Like an ass on fire, I was running. And there were no bugs, which was weird because we were 100 yards from a beehive. It was just after sunset, and I heard a whisper over my shoulder into my ear, "Leave." So my partner and I stand up, quiver our arrows, grab our chairs, and start walking towards the trail to the car. We are a few hundred yards from our blind, and my hunting partner whispers, "Hey, did you say leave because we still have 30 minutes of light give or take?" I told him no. There was a brief moment of terror followed by the fastest mile I've ever run in my life back to the car. I have no idea what made us decide to leave, but we were sitting in the blind. Just shy of the top of a hill, we had a 360-degree view and could see in all directions for hundreds of yards, yet neither of us saw anyone, even though it sounded like the whispers were right in our ears. This experience has really stayed with me more strongly and vividly than I can put into words. Although I find supernatural topics interesting to read about and research, I'm not a huge fan of them. However, I am absolutely positive this experience I had was something very strange. It just feels very jarring to this day when I think back to it. My wife and I are in Nara, Japan, wandering the backstreets after dinner and heading to the train. We cut down an alley, and at the end of the alley, there's a large, completely black dog standing and staring at us. Sort of a wolf/German Shepherd body type with shaggy, almost spiky fur. Extremely black, even its eyes seemed black. I mentioned to my wife how strange it is to see a stray dog in Japan. This is a first for me. He starts walking towards us, and she says, "I hope he's friendly, he's coming right to us." I wasn't scared, I just assumed it was friendly or not vicious, at least, because its walk seemed very unbothered. When he gets halfway down the alley, the dog, right in front of our eyes, changes into a much smaller cat. The dog just shapeshifted into a cat right in front of us. It took only 1 second, and suddenly the dog was a cat. We both saw exactly the same thing and both exclaimed, "What the hell?" at the same time. He gets up to us and stops and starts loudly meowing right at us. He's all black and has a very odd, half-length tail, almost like it's tied in a ball or knot. I have never seen a cat's tail that looks like this. He screams at us, and we respond by bowing, petting him, and apologizing for walking down his alley, explaining that we are travelers, that he is amazing, and that we wish we could take him home with us. Eventually we leave and go to the train. The cat goes on his way. We talk about how weird it was, and eventually I fall asleep on the way back to Osaka. I have the most vivid, colorful dream I've ever had in my life. The cat is standing on its back legs, it's wearing a very colorful robe, and it's sort of swaying in a weird way as it speaks, not a dance but a weird swaying motion. Almost like it's standing in a strong wind, but there's no wind. He says, "I allowed you to pass." And that's it, I immediately woke up. To this day, we talk about it all the time, both of us have a very strong connection to that experience. I have a few, but I'll tell you one. On my 47th birthday, I was showering to go out and celebrate. Then it was like I had just woken up, but I was walking across my living room nude and wet, with no idea how I got to that point. As I became mentally aware that I was in the living room, my legs gave out, and I dropped to the floor. I was completely aware, and I tried to catch myself, but my body didn't work. I was in the beginning stage of a heart attack. I crashed to the floor, and I immediately blacked out. I came to as someone was coming through my front door to see why I didn't show up to the celebration. I was in a pool of sweat, and it was 5 hours later. They called 911 as soon as they saw me on the floor. I was in and out of consciousness at that point. I briefly woke up in the ER of the closest hospital. That hospital couldn't stabilize me, so I had to be airlifted 100 miles away to a hospital with a better cardiology unit. The chopper was freezing inside because it was such short notice to get it up and running. Nothing got warmed up. The pilot later told me it was about as cold inside as the 34 degrees Fahrenheit it was outside. I was unconscious, so I couldn't convey how cold I was back there. The fact that I was drenched in sweat made it even worse. I didn't wake up again until they were taking me out of the chopper at the next hospital. When they were rushing me in, I was freezing. Freezing, unlike anything I've ever felt. It was a type of cold that cut all the way to the bone. I was shaking violently and could barely speak. Honestly, I think all the shaking was the only thing keeping me conscious at that point. It kind of kept me alert. They rushed me right into a room while they were waiting for the heart doctors and staff to get down there to the ER. I couldn't say much. I had no strength, but I mumbled to the nurses the best I could that I was freezing. The nurses all took off running out of the room to get warm blankets to put on me. When I was there alone, I remember thinking, this is it. This is the coldest I've ever felt in my entire life. The trembling was so intense that I actually thought to myself, I'm so cold, I'm probably going to die right here before they get back. I'm lucky I'm in a hospital, they'll know how to bring me back if I die from hypothermia. I can't explain it, but I really felt it in my soul that I was about to die from being so cold. As soon as I had that thought, a heat lamp above me turned on, and the room got an orange/yellow glow as it got hotter and brighter. It was like one of those lights they have in restaurants to keep your food warm. The light only came on for about 3 seconds and then shut back off. I remember just starting to feel a little heat from it when it shut back off. I thought to myself, that was far too short to warm me up even a little, and I'm still going to be freezing. In that exact moment, I immediately realized I was no longer cold, at all. I thought to myself, wow, that was quick, but that light completely warmed my body up. That was one heck of a heat lamp. I wasn't cold at all now. The violent shaking was also completely gone from those 3 seconds of heat. The nurses come running back in with heated blankets, and I mumbled the best I could that I didn't need them anymore. I was warm. They could barely hear me. A second later, a male nurse came over to listen to my heart and hooked me up to the machine that reads your heart waves and vitals. He said, "What's up? What did you say?" So I asked him, "What's up with those lights? What the hell kind of lights do y'all use?" The light worked, but they should have had it run just a little bit longer. As the nurse was putting the heart stickers all over my chest, he said, "What light? What lights do you mean? Do you know where you are? Do you know your name?" Just as I started to answer him, I opened my eyes up a little bit better and looked up at the lights. There was no heat light. Nothing of the sort. The lights were nothing but long fluorescent tube lights, like those you see in every office, hospital, school, etc. Absolutely nothing else. Once again, there was no heat lamp of any kind, and there was no way for the yellow light I saw to have become warmer or brighter. Nothing but normal, long, fluorescent, commercial-use light tubes. Was it paranormal? All I can say is, it happened exactly as I said. There's absolutely no other way to explain the experience and what happened. My unexplainable experience. Your views, please. Hi everyone. I would just like to relate my only experience with possible ghosts and something that has befuddled me ever since. In September 2001 I moved homes. The previous house was purchased in 1986. It was an older style house, probably built in the 1960s or early 1970s. I bought it when I was single and rented it out for a couple of years, but after I married my wife, my 2 daughters lived there as well. When we moved, I arranged to move out over a 3 to 4 day period due to a steep driveway, resulting in all our possessions having to be moved by small vehicles instead of a truck. On the last day when we had everything in the new house, I said to my wife that I would go back to the old house and check we had everything and then hand the keys to the agent in a local shopping center. At this time, we had already given one set of keys, my set, to the agent, so I took my wife's set of keys to go to the house and then to the agent's. This is where the first thing that I haven't been able to explain happened. The front door had 2 locks on it. When I got to the house, I started unlocking the door. My wife's keys would not open the door. The keys just turned in the lock, but nothing unlocked. I called my wife to check if her keys worked. She confirmed that when she unlocked and locked the house the day before, they all worked fine. Okay, I then called the agent and asked if I could come there and pick up my set of keys that we had left there a few days earlier. After picking them up I returned to the house and was able to enter with no issues. I walked around the house and did the usual things, opening cupboards, etc., to make sure we had everything. This is where it gets a bit freaky. I went into one of the 3 bedrooms. This room was used as a library/study. On the wall was a small whiteboard that I was leaving behind, as it was attached to the wall quite firmly. On the whiteboard were a couple of phone numbers and some other notes, I can't remember exactly what else. I licked my fingertip to rub the details out. At the point I did this, my whole body went completely ice cold. A cold that I have never experienced before or since. Concurrently with this, I heard the sound of a crying, maybe moaning, woman. Strangely, it seemed to be coming from all around and not one particular direction. I guess it's safe to say that I freaked out, ran to the door, and drove back to the new house. When I returned and walked in the door, my wife asked if I was alright. She said I was so pale. I told her what had just happened. I still think about this regularly. For an extended period, likely spanning 10 to 15 years, I would frequently, approximately every 2 to 3 weeks, experience a recurring dream, nightmare, involving someone being ended and interred beneath the house. The dream was always the same and consistently woke me up sweating. So, that's my unexplainable experience. I will add that I am a semi-retired 64-year-old IT consultant, and I consider myself fairly open-minded and intelligent. Any thoughts or possible explanations, please? Unexplainable stuff. When I was about 8 or 9, living in my old house, I hands down had one of the creepiest and most unexplainable situations happen to me. It was around 9 to 10 p.m. I had just been tucked into bed, and my mom left the room. When she left, she didn't close the door completely because we kept a light on in the hallway, and since I was a bit of an anxious sleeper, I felt comforted by having some light shine through. As she left, I could still hear her walking around the hallway, or so I thought it was her. I screamed out to her asking for her to get me a pillow. I heard the footsteps enter my mom's room, which was right next to mine. I know for a fact I heard someone walking because the floor would creak loudly anytime anyone walked on it. The footsteps then came back out of my mom's room, except she wasn't answering me or coming in. I was confused and I kept asking her what was up. A shadowy silhouette stopped directly in front of my room. I could see it because the light from the hallway reflected off my closet, which was located right next to my room's door. Just as I was about to get up from my bed and open the door, I suddenly started to hear whispering from the corners of my room. It started in one corner, and then it bounced to others, and every time it did that, it sounded like multiple voices were joining in. And what throws me off even more every time I think about this is that they weren't speaking anything that I could understand. It sounded almost like they were frantically whispering pure gibberish. I froze in fear for a couple of seconds, then, without thinking, I quickly got up and ran out of the room, rushing down the stairs to where I found my parents talking downstairs. My dad could tell I was extremely panicked, my mom seemed more pissed that I was out of bed, and I asked her if it was her upstairs the whole time, and she told me no and that she'd gone downstairs immediately after leaving my room. I explained to them what I'd experienced. My dad tried comforting me while my mother wasn't too bothered. I stayed downstairs with them the whole time until I finally fell asleep and my dad carried me back to my room. Every single time I try to tell people this story, I feel like I come across as some crazy schizo. Who knows? It could have been a hallucination, but I don't understand why my 8 or 9-year-old self would have a random hallucination one night and then never again for the rest of my life. I've decided to share this story in hopes that someone else might have a similar experience or could offer some theories or explanations. I'd also like to add that while growing up in that house, I always felt a negative vibe whenever I was inside. Even now, thinking about it makes me feel grossed out, and whenever I dream about that house, the dreams are always negative or unsettling. My mother claims she saw a mimic of me. Okay, so today I woke up around 2 p.m. I was sleeping and didn't wake up at any point before that hour. I don't sleepwalk. I said that because if I did, someone would have picked up on it already, and as the stories progress, it will make sense that it wasn't sleepwalking. She was sitting in the third room of the apartment, which is next to the living room. Then she sees me in the kitchen, passing to the living room. She was alone, my aunt was working, and my brother was out, positively. She thought it was me going to the living room window to see outside, and then she followed me, and there was nothing in the living room. She goes to the room I am sleeping in, and I'm still there, eyes closed, in the same position. So if it was sleepwalking, I'd have to literally run back to the room and lie back on the bed, a bunk bed, I think that's what it's called. 30 minutes pass, I wake up and go to the kitchen, and she sees me again and waves at me. Later she told me she did that to see if she was tripping again or it was really her. I waved back, and she smiled, that's it. Only now did she come to me and ask, were you dreaming about walking around the house or something like that? I answered no, and she explained the situation. A few months ago, or maybe a year already, the same thing happened to my aunt. She was in the third room working, since we don't have an office, and she saw me in the kitchen while I was sleeping. At least this time my brother was also home, but she was sure it was me. He's older, taller, and lighter skinned. But she mostly ignored it because it could have been my brother. Same thing as my mother. Later that day she comes to me and asks, why didn't you answer me when I called you? I replied that I had been sleeping. For a moment, 2-3 years ago, I had this weird feeling that someone else was living here. I couldn't shake it. There was this bed in the third room, no longer there, and it always felt like someone was hiding underneath it. For a while, I was sure someone was hiding there, but whenever I looked, no one was present. I felt like food was ending faster, things were going missing, etc. But this feeling went away after a while. Just to be sure, I considered the possibility of people breaking into apartments and living there secretly, but I realized this is impossible in Brazil. At least in the apartment where we live, there is no entrance or place to hide. I can't explain it, but there is no entrance or hiding place at all. That's it, no weird things besides that, I guess. Important things to note, my family is spiritual if it matters. Neither my mother nor aunt felt afraid even after they knew I was sleeping. If you believe in the spiritual world, my mother basically says that it's impossible for evil spirits to come inside the apartment, as it is protected. I guess I'm just looking for suggestions? Unexplained voice. So, last night around 9 p.m., my friend and I were outside chatting. When we were talking, we heard a voice say, go away, and it caught us off guard, and I remember getting chills. Let me put what we heard in the best context possible. This voice sounded like it came from the neighbor's side, as if someone were outside, but no one was outside. It was dark. No other sounds occurred, nor did anyone reply in case there was a possibility that there were children outside or anyone in that matter. The voice sounded like something was trying to imitate a human voice. It didn't sound male or female but like a parrot saying, go away. Hence, the sound is like an imitation. I'm open to the possibility that it was a parrot, maybe in their big tree, but I heard no rustling, and it's very unlikely a parrot was around at night. I'm still open to it. Additionally, I want to mention that it became very quiet after we heard the voice, and we expected someone to be outside on both sides of the neighbors' houses, but no one was there. My friend who I was chatting with is not superstitious and not a big believer of the supernatural, but when she clarified that to me and said, I heard that too, I knew I was in trouble lol. Where we live, it's a historical area, and all of the houses were built in the 1800s. There have been a few occasions where something supernatural occurred, like a cup falling over in our kitchen or a ball rolling and then stopping in our backyard. But never any voices. So I try to keep in mind spirits may be attached to their homes. I will also mention that, out of respect, the neighbor's teenage son ended himself last year, so I consider the possibility that it could be him. My sister was recently diagnosed with mild rheumatoid arthritis, which we never expected, so then my mind starts to think, what if an entity is around? I have a cousin who has the same issue and is now immobile. She has seen and felt demonic things in her house in Tennessee, but that's another story I'll share later. I hope someone can give input on this experience with the voice I heard outside. Thank you. Unexplained music during night fieldwork. I'm a biologist, and I didn't even consider the supernatural until the summer of 2023. I was leading a small research team of fellow students to study the behavior of monkeys at a small sanctuary in Florida. This particular monkey species was nocturnal, and as such, we only studied them around midnight to coincide with their natural rhythms. This sanctuary was located in the outskirts and had acres upon acres of untouched hardwood hammock that allowed the animals to roam in a natural ecosystem. There was one building, the keeper house, where supplies were kept, where the veterinarian worked out of, and where the break room was for the researchers and keepers. The rest of the land, except for that house, was covered in canopy and animal enclosures. This night was like any other. I had organized our schedule and gathered the treats for the monkeys and the supplies for our experiment. The first trial went smoothly, and I had just switched to the next enclosure for the second trial of the night. We were showing the monkeys a photo and seeing how they reacted to it. Another researcher and I sat side by side in cheap lawn chairs and followed the monkeys with our red-hued flashlights and recorded their movements and reactions. Most of the time, the monkeys would come closer to the photo, sit on a nearby branch, and stare, or they would make cute chirping and whooping sounds, sometimes towards us and other times towards their monkey partners. But this particular trial was different. The monkeys were more stagnant and hung closely to their nest boxes. That's when I heard soft music playing. At first, I thought it was just a sound playing in my head, but it kept growing. I looked behind me but saw nothing but the darkness of the woods. As it played louder, I realized that this was a very specific type of music, flute music. With no words and no other instruments, it played through the trees and managed to engulf the woods in its melody. Alice, the other researcher, put her hand on my shoulder, looking at me wide-eyed. "Do you hear it?" I asked. She slowly shook her head yes. I remember looking down at my watch and seeing that there were only 5 minutes left on our current trial. That's when Alice started to panic, a woman who is usually the bedrock of our group. And seeing her scared only made me more so. The flute intensified. I kept running through scenarios in my head, but I couldn't come up with any other reason for us to be hearing it. The entire place was gated, and there was a nearby road about 200 feet from our location. But who in this day and age would be listening to flute music in their car? And if they were driving, the music would have died down by this point. But it was growing louder and seemingly closer, meaning someone was playing this inside the fence and inside our woods. There were only 2 other people up at the keeper house, and they were over a quarter-mile away. That's when I felt it, an itching feeling behind me. I dared not look, but I knew in my chest that whatever was watching us, playing at us, was doing so from that dark part of the woods over my shoulder. I knew it well, because it was the place of that crooked tree between enclosures 5 and 6 that always had us tripping over its roots as we walked by. Alice must have known because she turned slowly towards me and uttered, "Don't look." That's when we heard it, or rather, the lack of monkeys. There were over 60 monkeys in those woods, and for the first time, they were all quiet. Even the monkeys we were observing had become completely disinterested in the photo and hid away completely in their nest box. I felt like I wanted to cry, and I tried to gaslight myself into oblivion. But nothing could have persuaded me that we weren't in danger in that moment. As soon as the timer went off, we ran back to the keeper's house, and we didn't look behind us. All the while, the flute music grew, and the monkeys went into an all-out vocal frenzy. Once we closed the door, we could no longer hear it, and the keeper on duty and our other researcher, Catherine, looked at us like we were crazy. After explaining what had happened, the keeper told us of the other weird things people had experienced in those woods, although none of those events seemed similar to ours. Catherine was easily scared, so she didn't want to talk about the events at all. What caused me the most unease was how disturbed Alice was by the event. She was half Native American and had learnt much from her grandmother, who was deeply spiritual. She revealed to us on our car ride home that she believed what we had witnessed was a skinwalker in the woods. And right as we got home, we needed to head straight inside and lock the doors and windows. She said she couldn't drop the feeling of us being followed. I have never known Alice to be a liar, and this is not something she would joke about. Catherine was so scared about the whole situation that she started crying, and we had to ride the rest of the way home in silence, which, for me, only made it worse. We never experienced anything like that again. But the fear I felt from that night still haunts me. Was Alice right? Or was it really just music from the road and us overreacting? Or was it something else supernatural entirely? I have no idea. The experience that haunts me the most was my fault. I was an impulsive Gothic teenager engaged in typical Gothic teenage pursuits such as writing, reading, collecting raven feathers, and maintaining the local cemetery. Now, the scariest thing in my hometown graveyard is the zombie-like drug addicts who use the place as a great, quiet place to shoot up. When I was 18, I was forced to move out. After couch surfing for 2 weeks, my grandpa opened his spare room for me in a neighboring small town. This place's cemetery wasn't as old but was a lot bigger with a full-time caretaker. I worked my butt off that summer for a little burger joint on Main Street with my best friends Michelle and Rodney. A week before the end of summer I quit my job and started preparing for my move to college. I wasn't expecting any parties or farewell celebrations. One day I was here and the next I was not. But no, oh no, Michelle couldn't have her best friend going to the big city without a proper send-off. She planned a day where we drove into town and picked up a Ouija board that she saw in the kids section of the local Wally World, the only grocery store within a 100-mile radius. Alright, BET. We get there, and it's not there. We ask an employee who has a religious meltdown in the middle of the store. Like Jesus, lady, please calm down. So we Google how to make an Ouija board and follow the instructions of a WikiHow. With the purchase of Crayola markers, a glass, salt, plastic cross, candles, white because Wally World didn't have black, and poster board, we picked up Rodney and 100 chicken nuggets from a fast food chain and then headed to the cemetery. Does this sound like a bad idea yet? Yes, did we care? No. We got the cemetery and then had a small argument about where to make our monstrosity. I vote for my car, but my car is dirty and not exactly a flat surface. But we are at a cemetery, it's not like there is just a table conveniently set up for us. No, but there are plenty of flat headstones. You see where this is going. Michelle and Rodney didn't want to desecrate any tombstones of long past relatives, so we went to the back of the cemetery, where the older resting places lie. God help us, we made a Ouija board on the headstone of someone who had the same first name as me and was only 3 years old. Thanks, Michelle, great choice. We sat there with the glass until well after 3 a.m. The sun was going to come up soon, and we still hadn't heard anything from the spirits. Michelle sighs in frustration. We pack up and head home. I know, uneventful. But have you ever had the wrath of a disrespected dead baby on your ass? Yeah, no, hard pass. It started out with little shadows out of the corner of my eye. I have issues and think I see things anyway, so I blew it off. Then I began having nightmares of ending Michelle, Rodney, and myself, like, WTF. I started therapy thinking this was a personal issue. It wasn't until after I visited my mom's grave, leaving a little memento, that shit picked up. I would wake up with bruises and cuts. Shadows seemed to move around my shared room. I believed I was going crazy until my roommate sat me down to chat. She experienced the same things, noticing objects moving and being rearranged. One of her beanie babies flew across the room one night. Another time while we were all out with our bedroom door locked, we came back to all of the posters ripped off the wall and her mirror smashed on the floor. We visited a lady that was a spiritual healer, and another roommate's mom, who was appalled. After ripping me a new one, she advised I put together a couple little things, flowers, a painted rock of a ladybug, food, etc., and leave them on the grave as an offering. After I formally apologized to the ghost and cleaned up the grave, nothing else has happened. I visited Michelle, who was having similar stuff happen to her and her husband. She would see small shadows peer out of doorways and torment her cats. The last time I spoke with her, she expressed a reluctance to reconcile, unlike me, as her husband was extremely upset that we would engage in something he deemed satanic. Nothing happened to Rodney. I mean, quite literally nothing. He believes it is due to his lack of active participation, unlike us. But yeah, that was probably one of the worst 3 months I have ever experienced. I wish I could point out one thing, but between seeing little shadows peeking behind doors and seeing a large shadow watching me sleep, it all goes into a large note pile. This isn't paranormal, but it's strange. I was very young, like 8 or so. We had gone on a field trip for school. It was early in the 90s, and our school wouldn't let us go without at least one parent present because it was quite a distance, so my mom went with me. It was some little festival in southeast Texas. I don't remember too much except it reminded me of a small-town rodeo. Here's where it gets strange. I vividly remember a very tiny car, although I'm not sure what kind it was. In my mind, it resembled a very old car, like one from the 1800s. The man driving the car was dressed as either a prospector or a cowboy, but I am not sure which. What I am 100% sure of is that the man driving this tiny vehicle was a puppet. It looked like something out of Sesame Street. Now, I wasn't so naive that I believed he was real, mainly because my dad was a puppeteer at our local church, and a huge reason I'm a huge fan of puppets to this day. So even at a young age I knew the puppet was being controlled, but I couldn't figure out how. The car was too tiny for anyone, even a dwarf, to be inside. There were a bunch of us kids around the puppet, and they were laughing at things he was saying, but little ol' me was more interested in who was controlling him. I even asked the puppet, and of course he laughed it off, saying he didn't understand. After a while he drove off further into the festival, which was the last time I saw him. I have a very distinct memory watching him go. Now I've spent a long time, 20 plus years, thinking about this. I've even considered the possibility that it was a dream, but when I ask my mom, she recalls going to this place and even describes it in the same way I remember. She doesn't remember ever seeing the puppet, but she remembers kids talking about him, though. I have never heard of a puppet like this, not even a remote-controlled one, which was a theory I had. 1. That kind of technology back then, if it existed, would have been far too expensive for such a small event. 2. The puppet didn't move robotically, it moved fluidly, and having been brought up around puppetry, I know a professional versus an amateur. 3. There was no way anyone could fit in that car, not even I, nor a dwarf. I'm not good with determining sizes, but I would say it was about the size of a kid's power wheel, a little smaller and closer to the ground. I know for a fact no one could fit in a hidden spot in that vehicle, not unless they were the size of a 2 or 3-year-old. To this day I don't know how that puppet was controlled, and it bothers me worse than any paranormal thing I've ever experienced. It's strange you ask this because I was literally thinking about this incident the other day. Unexplained experience. Over my lifetime, I've had a handful of paranormal experiences, from unexplained noise to actually seeing a full apparition before my own eyes. However, there was one experience in particular that has left me completely baffled and has raised so many questions I simply cannot answer. I was around 16 at the time and lived in a 2-story apartment with my mother and 2 younger brothers. We had just had cable TV installed downstairs, and I decided to split the connection to run a line to my upstairs bedroom. The cable was about 2 feet short of reaching my television. I grabbed one of those gold male-to-male coaxial adapters and a 3-foot section of coaxial cable to finish the run and turned on my television and verified I had a signal. In a little bit, I was going to leave for a semi-formal event and needed my dress pants. I went to the closet where there should have been my sport coat, but it was missing. I figured that they must be in my drawer with the rest of my pants, but upon looking, they were not. Since my laundry would often get mixed up with my next younger brother, I checked his room with no luck. Finally, I decided they must be in the basement, either in the washer, in the dryer, or under the clothes chute. Once again, I was unable to find anything. Thanks for sticking with me to this point, because this is where the high strangeness kicks in. After coming up empty-handed in the basement, I decided I just need to look harder in my bedroom. As I came back upstairs and entered my room, I noticed the top drawer of my dresser was pulled all the way open, and neatly folded on top of my socks and underwear were my missing pair of dress pants. Now, I was home alone this entire time, so no one else could have placed them there. I was shook, and needing to have some background noise, I went to turn on the television. Instead of the last channel I was watching, I just had static. I looked behind the television, and the cable was no longer connected, the male-to-male adapter was gone. I know it's not the craziest story out there, but it stuck with me for so long because of the implications. What took my pants? How did it know, and at what point did it know I was going to look for them? Where were they physically before they ended up in my top drawer? If I had a nanny cam in my room, what would it have picked up? Would you see the top drawer open and the pants materialize, or would you see some shadow figure set them there and disappear? Where did that coaxial adapter go? I never did find that one. With experiences like this, are there any good readings or theories about where these objects go? Since I never announced I was about to grab my dress pants, did something read my mind? I feel like with similar stories, people just chalk it up to poltergeist activity, and maybe that's what this was, but I'm more interested in the logistics behind it. Unexplainable, either ghostly or otherworldly, experience from my childhood. When I was 9 years old, I was sitting at the swings on my playground all alone. Because it was only a 2-road walk to my house, my parents trusted me to be there alone. However, it's important to note that I was unaware of this, and I would often take a longer route that typically took about 20 minutes. But as I was sitting on the swings, a gray car drives by that's playing an instrumental of a nursery rhyme, kind of like the ice cream truck song, but it wasn't exactly the same. However, even though I heard the song start to get louder as the car approached, when it drove away the music stayed equally as loud. And I tried to make out the face of the driver, but I couldn't see anything. And it wasn't like the windows were just tinted really dark, it kind of just looked like the inside was so fogged up that it covered the window. And now I'm getting really freaked out because the car drove away, but the music is still extremely loud, and there is nobody anywhere near me. Thinking I was either about to get kidnapped or that an ice cream truck was blasting loudly in my neighborhood, I was already terrified of ice cream trucks because of that one haunting hour episode. I started my 20-minute walk home. And that neighborhood is really big, with cars constantly driving on the streets, partly due to the size and also partly due to the fact it's behind a big grocery store and right beside a plaza. So I would always see cars or at least people walking by, especially on a weekend. But the whole 20-minute walk, despite the fact I easily walked down at least 6 streets to get home, I didn't see a single person or car. But the music was still blasting throughout the neighborhood. Despite being completely alone and hearing music blasting throughout the entire neighborhood, I could still hear sounds of people doing woodwork, such as chainsaws and other loud mechanical noises. However, I couldn't see a single soul outside, and almost everyone's windows were covered. Once I finally reach my street, the music starts to get quieter. And right as I get to my front porch, it just completely stops. I know there was no chance I was accidentally playing music because I didn't have any electronics, and I'm 100% sure I wasn't being followed because the whole time I was looking behind me and around me, and there was not a single person in sight, nor did the music ever sound like it was fading or getting closer up until I reached my house. I still have no idea what happened that day, but there is no way there is a non-paranormal explanation for this. Unexplained experiences at an old segregation school. I've always believed in the paranormal, but recently I kind of stopped believing, to be honest. But then, recently my BF and I have been tagging along with a local, well-known ghost hunting crew in our area. We've been to this specific location twice. It was a segregation school for the Apache and Mexican American children in the early 1900s. I'll start this encounter off with us specifically in the basement. We all got an instant eerie vibe, which was not felt the first time we went. There were a few encounters that we had, but I will explain the few main ones that stuck out. The basement is said to be where it had taken place. They say a spirit resides there that they call elemental. They believe it is with the land, as it is native ground. The lead investigator was telling us how in the doorway of the basement she was snapping back-to-back photos, and with each picture you can see a tall shadow forming. After the third photo, her phone displayed a message saying, "Camera storage full." While she was telling that story, I was recording her. Next thing you know, no more than 30 seconds later, after she told that story, my video cuts off, and I get a notification, "Camera roll storage full." I have 2 terabytes of storage, it is nowhere near full. So I restart my phone, start recording again, and then we move on to an Estes method session. We start receiving messages to get out, etc. The video cuts off with a storage full message, and after that, I couldn't record again because nothing was working. At that moment we start receiving messages. Get out, leave, cuss words, and more messages pertaining to getting out. So out of respect we cut our investigation short and leave the basement. We go back to the main level, and my camera and storage go back to normal. I didn't receive that message again since we left the basement. That is no coincidence and reminded me just how real the paranormal is. In addition to hearing footsteps that night and experiencing EMF tools going off, we also heard our kids' names being called. Just an eventful night overall, the energy and presence were definitely felt. Unexplainable incident about 10 years ago. Hey guys, I'm a long-time lurker. I thought I'd finally share my strange story and contribute to this community a little. I had some other odd experiences when I was quite young, and my family described strange things in that time period too. But I was too young and chalked what I saw up to memory distortion. This incident occurred when I was 18, though, and I remember it all vividly. This occurred in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, a town a little outside Tulsa. I was staying at my grandparents' house, and my cousins were visiting. It was storming in the distance, but not raining where we were, so my cousin, brother, and I went outside to watch the lightning. My cousin had described numerous strange paranormal occurrences he had seen, and during this visit he was describing seeing ghosts in the peripheral of his vision. He claimed that other people who spent time with him were also seeing them and that some of these people were being pussies about it. He wasn't a very nice person back then. As we sat on a brick wall watching the lightning in the distance, he was saying he was seeing them here and there and describing what they looked like. Honestly, I didn't really believe him and still am not sure I do. At one point he freaked out and said he saw what appeared to be a little girl. He said it was the freakiest one he'd seen yet. I began to feel a little unnerved, and I'm not sure why. I remember that I still did not believe him at this point, but the unease was growing pretty strong, and I was starting to nervously glance around over my shoulder. Here is where the incident started. I turned around and saw a figure of a small girl dart behind an air conditioner unit on the side of the house. I am not sure what prompted this, but we all felt the urgency to get up and run at once. We didn't discuss anything. I thought in the back of my mind that it was my younger cousin, as she would often follow us around. But the urge to run persisted, and it got a little weirder. My brother stopped next to the air conditioner unit, looked where I'd seen the figure dart, and screamed. Again, quick mental processing. I thought maybe he was messing with our younger cousin who might have come out and followed us. But no, as I ran by, there was nobody there. We all three ran into the house. My brother and cousin went to a bedroom in the back of the house, and I stayed in the front of the house trying to process what I had seen. Eventually I went back to talk to them about it. They were both sitting there on a bed, and my cousin was like, "Oh, yep, look, he's scared," and laughed at me. He was a bit of a bully to me at this point. I tried asking them about it, and they denied seeing anything and didn't explain why we all ran. It's almost as though none of this happened for them. In the years following, I've brought this up with my brother on multiple occasions, and he does not recall screaming or even really remember the actual incident aside from us watching the storm and my cousin describing seeing the ghosts. I mentioned it to my brother again a few days ago, and he still does not remember any of the unsettling feelings I experienced in that situation. He has no recollection of stopping and screaming behind the air conditioner unit. Unfortunately, my cousin passed away about 8 years ago. And I never did bring it up with him despite growing close to him in the few years before he died. That's my one unexplainable story I've encountered. It still creeps me out when I think about it. My cousin seemed to be a sort of lightning rod for strange happenings, as he had many paranormal stories, and I have confirmed some with other people who were with him during these events. He moved around a lot, and some of the houses he moved to were straight up creepy. I think he lived in 6 different houses in that area alone. Anyway, I'm still not sure what the hell happened there. It still creeps me out. I felt something today I have little explanation for. My family and I considered visiting the Kingston Pen a time to honor our country's history. Since it was built before Canada became an official country, it is clear that the stories associated with this place are plentiful. Our first stop, while awaiting our time for the tour, was the old warden's house across the street from the pen. My wife, mother and I had visited this location once before, and I had no ill feelings towards the place, its history, or the events that were showcased in displays. Today, however, felt different. It felt unsettling. I didn't feel it walking up the stairs to the house, but the moment I stepped through the doors I could feel it. This dark pit, I don't have words to describe, other than it felt wrong. Unnatural. This feeling, which I chalked up to limited food intake and the effect of my current stressors, did not dissipate. Even after leaving the building and sitting on a bench to smoke, I felt this darkness loom over me. Like a blanket I couldn't take off. I felt raw, out of my element. Again, pushing aside stress or mental factors, I spoke with my wife before meeting with the rest of my family. We had entered the pen through the main doors. The architecture was, of course, old. Limestone, cut hundreds of years ago, stood strong as a testament to the entrapment these convicts, these people, felt day to day. This was when my feeling of unease became more noticeable, resulting in a vicarious sensation I have yet to be able to replicate, nor have I felt in over 20 years. We entered the courtyard of the pen. It was clean, wide, and green with grass. You wouldn't have imagined such atrocities occurred on these premises, as without the bars on the windows, or even with them on, it could have easily been an educational institution. My first feeling came upon arriving at the designated tour spot. Behind us were doors, 2 specifically overlapping one another. The foremost door was a large iron gate, barred like a traditional prison door, that stood over 15 feet tall, and behind it was a worn wooden door. I touched the gate, admiring the history, when a wave of unease came across. I need to emphasize this: I have seen things that no person should see, violence of an unprecedented nature. I've experienced trauma and PTSD, it takes a great deal to shake my nerves. But when I touched this gate, the metal was cool to the touch but not cold. A wave of darkness flooded. The hair on the arm that touched the gate, even after removing it, stood on end. I could feel it. I could feel the horror, the pain, the fear, and the death that had crossed its threshold. It was from here I became super vigilant. Several crows or ravens had been seen overhead, not together but separate. One flew overhead after I touched it and another before we entered the pen. I felt like I wasn't supposed to be here, that something was watching me, that it knew I could feel it. We entered the main part of the pen where the cells were lined up. My mom and stepdad had fun. They couldn't feel or, for lack of a better term, sense what I did. There was art created by the past residences, the convicts, of this cell block. I felt nothing there, it was empty to me. I tried to touch several spots, trying to see if a similar temperature stimulus could create the feeling I had at the main gate, but none had an effect. Until we walked by one cell upon leaving, there was wrapping along the bars. I couldn't make out the material, but it appeared like bandaging of sorts. I thought I felt something but couldn't confirm. I declined this as a strong point. The next spot was where the 1971 riot occurred, outside of the pen's canteen. Despite the events that occurred, I felt no sensation or stimulus. That was until I looked down a hallway. It wasn't long per se, maybe 15 meters long. I looked down, and I felt like something was looking back at me. We then entered an area that, to my understanding, was the main hub of the pen. It was here I could feel it. I could feel the fear. It was monumental in nature. Overwhelming. I couldn't stay long, and thus my observations for this area are limited. Then we entered a secured cell block. There was a laminated sign saying Suicide Watch. I felt something minuscule at first until I approached cell 15. Without looking inside, I felt the darkness again. Pain, fear, hurt and loss. When I walked in, the walls were full of words, many of which had deteriorated, but one could stand out clear as day. Help me. This was the last for me. By this point I knew I needed to leave. I had to leave. There was nothing in this building or area that I wanted to see. I needed to get out. That's all I felt. You must leave. Now. When I left the pen, no pictures were taken aside from the memories in my mind. The sense of dread, of darkness, did not leave. I felt shaken to my core by this building. I entered the pen with the mindset of it being a beautiful historic point with a dark, unfavorable history. Now, I believe we must destroy this building, its contents, and everything about it. There is something there, a darkness, one of pain, fear and death. It does not belong in this world. The harm this building in its entirety exudes does not have a place in this world. I am removed. My job is to see things and do things that normal people shouldn't be expected to do. I fear very little, and given the content I have encountered, there is little that unsettles me anymore. But this place is wrong. That is the most accurate description I can provide. This place is wrong. In 2004, I had my first experience with something unexplainable. I tried for years to find it again. I've read what I could, but it is hard to filter through truth, mental illness, fabrication/delusions of some ability, such as most psychics, and feelings that relate to what I've seen. This was the first time in 20 years this feeling came back. My current theory, utilizing what exposure I could consider, is the belief of life and death within oneself. From the past age of 6 to just 2 weeks ago, I wanted to die. I did not wish to live on this earth, in this life. My viewpoints through therapy and help have changed, and now I choose to live my life to the fullest. This is the difference. I believe that this perspective allows one to feel things beyond this world. We limit our ability to view the world in its entirety. As a child, you believe in the wonders and magic of the world before eventually diluting it with burdens, trauma, etc. We lose our ability to view the world in any other way than what we know as factual. This, to me, felt like an awakening. It felt as though a part of me had been recovered in a way I cannot yet explain, except for my desire to live. It is this lost piece that I believe allows us to sense things otherwise impossible to detect by traditional human senses and even the advanced technology we have created. I do not know what resides in the pen, but I know for certain I will never return. The living should not probe whatever energy remains from the continuous pain, horror, and death that resides there. An unexplainable experience from my early 20s. When I was about 21 years old, I was at a friend's house in Rehoboth, Massachusetts, sitting around a fire with a group of friends. We would do this pretty often and all hang out around the fire and chat. Some people would drink or smoke weed or cigars. Nothing too rowdy. We were all pretty tame, responsible people. At that point in my life I had just started drinking pretty recently and had never smoked weed or taken any kind of drugs. I have no history of schizophrenia or any disorder of that sort. That night, I drank about 4 Woodchuck hard ciders, and during a recent trip to New Hampshire, we bought some really awful grape-flavored cigars called Double Diamonds that were dirt cheap. I smoked a few of those cigars throughout the night. I list all these details because my first thought as a skeptic after the experience I'm about to share was that maybe it was caused by chemicals in these cigars or the combination of that with the hard ciders. After spending a few hours together, I suddenly experienced a strange sensation that I can now only describe as somewhat akin to the onset of a panic attack. I had never had a panic attack or felt anything remotely similar before. It was an increasing wave of heaviness and terror on my body that began to scare me, but I didn't want anyone there to freak out, so I didn't say anything to anyone. I realize that what I'm about to say sounds absolutely ducking insane, but this is what I experienced. That sensation would last a minute or so, but when it came to its peak I was no longer around the fire with all my friends. What I was seeing now was a pool almost on a ship that I would describe from a sci-fi movie like Alien or even something that reminded me of The Matrix, although, sadly, I've never seen any of the Matrix movies. It was pretty dark but futuristic looking. I remember a girl was talking to me who appeared to be around the same age as me, and she looked familiar, but I didn't know her, and there were other people interacting in the area, but I don't have any recollection of them or what they were doing. These visuals were brief, and then suddenly I would come to my senses and find myself back sitting around the fire with all my friends. Again, I didn't want to scare anyone, or myself further, or seem crazy, so I didn't say anything to them or express concern even though I was thinking, what the F just happened? But as scared as I was and as terrifying as the wave of the sensation that came over me was before seeing whatever it was that I saw, a part of me wanted it to happen again. And it did. I'm not sure how long after the first time that it happened again, but the same panic attack-like sensation came over me, and then again I was seeing a different setting, despite sitting around a fire with my friends. The same scene didn't play out when I was back in it. Details of that are kind of fuzzy, but I do remember following people around the pool in this dark room. I cannot remember how many times I returned to this feeling or different vision, but after it continued to occur, I began to panic. Eventually it was scaring me so much that I ended up leaving the fire and had to drive about 25 to 30 minutes home. As soon as I got to my car, I called my girlfriend at the time, who was at her house. The phone made the dialing tone like all phones do when you call someone, but it started crackling and making strange glitchy noises. My girlfriend picked up the phone, and I heard this strange noise that sounded like something was breathing in and moving their tongue around their mouth rapidly with metallic feedback. The first thing she said was, "What the duck was that?" For maybe 1 second I was a little bit relieved that she heard it too, but then I became so ducking scared because why wouldn't I, based on the things that were happening? I told her what happened at the fire and asked her to stay on the phone with me while I drove home in case it happened while I was driving because I didn't want to crash and get hurt with no help if so. Luckily, I was able to drive home safely, and when I got home, I went straight downstairs to my room. Since it didn't happen again the entire car ride, I figured I was in the clear, so I lay down on my bed, and within 5 minutes, I felt that sensation coming upon me again. It happened again, with me feeling like I was somewhere else seeing a completely different scene, and as soon as I was out, I called my girlfriend back and let her know. I heard the same strange noises on the phone one more time when it was dialing, but that was the extent of it. Eventually I was able to fall asleep, and since then I've never experienced anything remotely like that ever. I understand this all sounds like bullshit or the ramblings of an insane person, but I'm just sharing something I experienced. Believe me or not, I don't really care. Like I said above, part of me feels like maybe the chemicals of the cheap shitty cigars may have caused some strange interaction with my brain, but I can't explain that both my girlfriend and I were able to hear the strange and terrifying noises on the phone. Another thought I had is, did someone at the fire dose me with something? But I trusted my friends there, and they weren't the type to do that. I split with my girlfriend a few years after the events I experienced, and part of me always wants to reach out to see if she remembers any of the details of that night, especially regarding the phone noises, but at this point in life it'd be way too awkward to reach out and ask that. Thanks for listening to my experience, and if you've had anything similar occur, please let me know.